the artifacts whisper. An ordinary day turns extraordinary as John discovers an ancient object with unearthly properties. John Hargrove awoke before dawn in a modest apartment overlooking a quiet street, a sanctuary of routine that had long provided both comfort and a subtle undercurrent of unease. Each morning, as he mechanically prepared his cup of strong, bitter coffee, he felt the familiar hum of everyday life wrap around him like a well-worn sweater. Yet, beneath the predictable rhythm of his day-to-day existence, there stirred a quiet longing for something more, a secret desire for mystery that he hardly dared to acknowledge. As he sat in the pale light of early morning, John's thoughts wandered in gentle tangents. Recollections of childhood adventures that hinted at a world brimming with magic and possibility, and a yearning for connections that surpassed the mundane. Even as he folded the newspaper neatly and sipped his coffee, he mused silently about the patterns he observed in the flickering streetlights and the whispered traces of fog that occasionally crept along the pavement. There was, in these reflections, an unspoken promise that something extraordinary might be hidden behind the veil of the ordinary. On his leisurely walk to work, the streets of his small town revealed an array of comforting familiarities: the rhythmic passing of neighbors, the scent of freshly baked bread from the corner bakery, and even the occasional flash of unusual color in a passing car's reflection on rain-wet sidewalks. To any casual onlooker, John's steps seemed measured and self-assured. Yet in his mind, every detail was catalogued with a vivid intensity. The gentle rustle of autumn leaves or the quiet murmur of a distant conversation held for him a quiet significance, as though these everyday occurrences carried hints of stories waiting to be told. At his job in a modest office building, amid the hum of computers and the murmur of routine greetings, John's internal monologue never fully succumbed to the demands of standard procedures. Between the transfer of files and the clack of keyboard keys, he often allowed himself brief escape into realms of thought where the boundaries of the everyday blurred into the potential for the unknown. His eyes, at times, would fix on a particularly striking detail, a reflection in a window or a peculiar glimpse of light, that stirred in him the faintest hope that the world concealed layers of wonder beneath its orderly surface. In these fragments of routine, John was both participant and observer, living a life that many would call unremarkable while quietly harboring a sensitive curiosity about the unknown. His heart, steady and unassuming, nonetheless throbbed with the possibility of discovery. There was a hint of vulnerability in his careful pauses and in the reflective timbre of his inner voice, a softness that suggested he was acutely aware that life could indeed be more than the narrow confines of habit. With each measured step through his familiar surroundings, he unconsciously laid the groundwork for a future encounter that would challenge every presupposition about what was ordinary and what might lie hidden just out of sight. On what should have been a commonplace afternoon, the world seemed to stretch into a muted panorama of routine. Suburban streets bathed in gentle sunlight, casual voices drifting from nearby windows, and a hum of familiar urban life. Yet as John ambled along the cracked sidewalk toward a local errand, an odd sensation tugged at his awareness, a subtle deviation from the norm that he couldn't quite disregard. There was a momentary pause in the usual clamor. The chatter of pedestrians thinned, distant car engines nearly stilled, and even the birds appeared to hush in a conspiratorial silence. Drifting away from the well-traveled path, John found himself drawn toward the quieter edges of the neighborhood. A narrow, graffiti-scarred alleyway, one he'd passed countless times without a second thought, suddenly radiated an inexplicable pull. The ambient light, filtered through a gap between aging brick buildings, took on a peculiar clarity, casting elongated shadows that danced across uneven pavement. In that brief, uncanny interlude, time itself seemed to limp, its familiar cadence interrupted by what felt like an otherworldly punctuation. Deep within the recess of that alley, partially obscured by a stack of forgotten crates and wild, rebellious ivy, lay an object that defied all expectation. There, on a small, time-worn stone platform, was something that shimmered with an eerie luminescence, as if lit from an inner fire not of this place. The object's presence was both deliberate and enigmatic, a remnant of an era lost to time, inexplicably incongruent with the modern decay that surrounded it. Even the textures of its surface betrayed a history too dense to unravel at first glance. Delicate, arcane etchings meandered along its contours, their patterns reminiscent of forgotten languages and rituals. The sudden change in the atmosphere was almost tangible. A cold, crisp breath seemed to emanate from the very air around the platform, replacing the warmth and dust that had so far been his steady companions. The usual clamor of city sounds, the murmur of everyday life, seemed to recoil, leaving space for an unnerving stillness. Every sense was heightened. The faint scent of damp earth and decaying wood mingled with a hint of something metallic, and the interplay of light and shadow carved the object's peculiar silhouette into stark relief against the aged stone. As John inched closer, his footsteps slowed by a mix of curiosity and a dawning apprehension. The corridor grew ever more silent. There was a mysterious gravity to the scene, a silent warning, perhaps, that what lay before him was no mere relic but a harbinger of unknown forces. The soft rustle of ivy brushing against stone, the whisper of a breeze culminating in a stillness that stilled his own heartbeat, all coalesced into a moment laden with foreboding promise. Here, within the secluded confines of an overgrown urban secret, the mundane and the mystical had collided in a single, breathless instant. In that hidden pocket of the ordinary, the unexpected revelation of the object transformed the day's familiar canvas into one fraught with possibility and latent dread. Its mysterious aura challenged every assumption John held about the world around him, marking a subtle yet irreversible turning point, a call to venture further into unexplored realms where the boundaries of reality itself appeared to waver. A small, enigmatic object rests on a weathered stone pedestal, demanding attention with a quiet, irresistible allure. Its form, reminiscent of an obelisk yet curiously irregular, is cast in a metal whose surface shimmers with a mysterious patina of age and destiny. Upon closer inspection, one discovers a network of cryptic inscriptions that wind across its entirety. These sinuous carvings seem almost alive, their shapes both elegant and ominous, etched with a precision that hints at knowledge too profound for mortal understanding. The lines and curves interlace in complex patterns, as though documenting a language lost to time, a silent script that shifts imperceptibly in shape when observed from different angles. The artifact does not shine with overt brilliance. Instead, it radiates a soft and eerie luminescence that bathes its surroundings in a gentle, haunting glow. This light, reminiscent of the delicate illumination of twilight or the pallid gleam of moonlight on fog, is simultaneously inviting and disconcerting. It casts dancing shadows that create mesmerizing patterns on nearby surfaces, each flicker of light revealing hidden contours and deep recesses over which the interplay of brightness and darkness imbues the object with life of its own. One might compare its glow to the slow, rhythmic pulse of a heart, a steady beacon that both mesmerizes and warns. Accompanying its visual mystique is an almost imperceptible auditory presence. Faint whispers seem to emanate from within the artifact itself, subtle, sibilant murmurs that ebb and flow like a soft breeze through ancient ruins. There is no clear language to these sounds, only a resonant, otherworldly cadence that hints at a consciousness dwelling beneath its surface. These whispers evoke an unsettling awareness, as if the relic were sharing secrets of primordial origin with those willing to listen, and yet, they leave an undeniable chill in their wake. Touching its surface reveals an equally disquieting complexity. The metal feels cool, unnervingly smooth in some areas, while other sections bear a slight texture, as if time itself has etched memories into its form. The contrast between the polished expanses and the subtler, almost organic irregularities in its finish gives the impression of an object both meticulously crafted and mysteriously aged, an anomaly that defies the boundaries of natural decay. The tactile feedback reinforces the notion that this relic is not merely a lifeless artifact but a living repository of ancient, elemental power. In its totality, the object stands as a study in paradox. Its exquisite, almost mesmerizing beauty invites closer scrutiny and promises revelations far beyond the ordinary. Yet there is an ineffable dread in the way its very presence disturbs the air, a reminder that some mysteries are best left unchallenged. The artifact embodies the delicate balance of allure and menace. It is as though it were designed to both seduce and warn, to offer secrets at the price of a deep-seated, ineradicable trepidation. Every facet of its being, from the dancing interplay of light and shadow to the soft rhythm of its whisper and the intricate etchings that adorn its surface, serves as a testament to a power that resists simple explanation and compels an intimate reckoning with forces beyond our understanding. John's heart pounded with a rapid and unexpected rhythm, as though trying to announce a secret only his soul could hear. In that split second following the discovery, an intense cocktail of emotions surged through him, a delicate dance between wonder and dread. His eyes, wide with an almost desperate curiosity, fixed upon the artifact. Yet there was a hesitance, a silent question that trembled on his lips. Was this marvel a blessing or an omen? The object's gentle glow, at once inviting and eerie, seemed to pull him into an internal vortex of conflicting feelings. At first, there was an inexplicable appreciation, a reverence reminiscent of beholding something long forgotten yet deeply familiar. It was as if every etched symbol and every nuanced shimmer carried whispers of untold histories and obscure knowledge. John felt the stirrings of recognition, an echo of an experience buried deep within him, as if the artifact had awakened memories he never knew he harbored. That spark of wonder, however, was quickly shadowed by a profound sense of foreboding. It was as if a dark presence lurked behind the luminous surface, hinting at dangers that transcended the physical and threatened to unravel the fabric of his calm existence. In the cavern of his mind, a quiet storm began to build, a relentless debate between his rational instincts and the pull of an arcane allure that urged him to explore further. Every beat of his heart seemed to declare that this was no ordinary relic. It was a conduit to something vast and inscrutable, capable of altering the very course of his life. Even as his rational voice tried to assert caution, an almost magnetic fascination compelled him to lean in closer, to decipher the silent language of its brightness and shadow. The more he gazed at it, the more the artifact transformed into a mirror reflecting his hidden doubts and vulnerabilities. Moments of past regret, fears he'd masked behind everyday monotony, and a nagging sensation that everything once familiar could be irrevocably lost in the wake of its mysterious power. The intricate patterns etched on its surface seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat, each pulse resonating with the unspoken implications of its existence. In these fleeting moments, John realized that the object was not merely a remnant of a forgotten age, but a living testament to the thin line between the known and the unfathomable. A part of him wrestled with the burgeoning realization that the relic's influence might extend far beyond the allure of an antique curiosity. It might, in fact, unravel the very core of his being. This inner tumult, a blend of burgeoning revelation and a deep-rooted terror, left him suspended in time, caught in a moment where the beauty of discovery and the weight of imminent peril interwove seamlessly. Every sensation, every heartbeat, testified that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. Long after the initial shock of the discovery had subsided, John found himself compelled to seek answers in the silent testimony of forgotten texts and time-worn legends. He recalled the faded lines of archival research that had once brushed against his memory, a series of fragmented documents detailing an ancient civilization whose wisdom and mysteries had long slipped into obscurity. According to these obscure records, relics bearing similar enigmata were not mere artifacts but rather conduits of a hidden realm, a place where history and myth converged. In the margins of a brittle manuscript, scrawled notes hinted at the artifact's connection to rituals of cosmic significance. It was said to be the Key of Shadows, an enigmatic object that once served as an interstice between this world and one that defied human convention. John spent countless hours poring over manuscripts in dimly lit archives and libraries, absorbing details that intertwined folklore with historical fact. The local legends, passed down by aging elders and inscribed in regional ballads, spoke of times when the boundaries between mortal life and the supernatural were not so stark. In hushed tones, ancient storytellers recounted how a similar object had been worshipped and feared, a duality that now resonated in the soft, eerie glow emanating from the relic before him. In these scattered accounts, the artifact was never described as an isolated phenomenon. Rather, it was an integral part of a broader tapestry, a relic that connected the earthly to the ineffable, the seen to the unseen. Every reference John uncovered seemed to emphasize the idea that the artifact's cryptic inscriptions were not random. Instead, they appeared to encode celestial cycles and elemental lore, traces of a time when humanity reached out to understand the vast, unpredictable forces of nature and fate. One particularly striking source was an old travel log from a long-forgotten explorer, which suggested that relics of this nature were often the focal point of local rites designed to balance the precarious order between chaos and stability. This explorer had written about a ritualistic inversion of day and night, during which the artifact would whisper hints of another, darker dimension, echoing through the hearts of those present and altering the course of their destinies. As John connected these historical dots, he began to appreciate the duality inherent in the artifact. Its allure was not simply in its material beauty, etched symbols dancing in a light that seemed almost sentient, but in its promise of revealing suppressed truths buried beneath the layers of conventional history. The relic, with its ancient markings and spectral shimmer, beckoned him toward a narrative where myth met reality. It was as if every legend he had encountered was a piece of a larger puzzle that, when assembled, might illuminate not only the artifact's origins but also a broader, more unsettling understanding of the world's hidden dimensions. In these moments of quiet study and intense reflection, John understood that the relic was more than a curiosity. It was a repository of forgotten lore, a silent witness to the interplay between human ambition and the inscrutable powers that have, across the ages, shaped civilizations and fates alike. Through the veil, John's fateful decision leads him beyond the familiar, crossing the threshold into an unfathomable realm. John stood motionless in the dim light, eyes fixed on the artifact that lay before him like a sleeping secret. Its surface shimmered with cryptic patterns that seemed to pulse in time with the beat of his heart, a heartbeat that now hammered in his ears, as if to announce the momentous decision he was about to make. In this suspended instant, the world around him had faded into insignificance, replaced by an almost palpable tug at the core of his being. A compulsion that whispered promises of revelations far beyond the reach of ordinary life. Inside, a maelstrom of conflicting emotions churned relentlessly. A deep-seated curiosity, long subdued by the confines of routine, surged forward with an urgency that could not be ignored. At the same time, a cold, rational part of him warned of the dangers lying in wait on the other side of this threshold. Memories of lost opportunities and unfulfilled potentials lent him a bittersweet resolve, urging him to grasp this chance for transformation even as uncertainty shrouded every imaginable outcome. He was caught in a delicate balance between apprehension and a yearning for something more, a pull that was both seductive and terrifying in its inevitability. In that charged moment, the artifact seemed to breathe life into the silence. A subtle hum emanated from its surface, a nearly imperceptible cadence that resonated within him, stirring dormant facets of his inner self. It was as though the relic was calling forth a long-forgotten part of his soul, urging him to confront truths buried beneath layers of caution and conformity. The call was not violent or abrupt but gentle and insistent, coaxing him to dare to step into a realm where every known boundary would begin to crumble. He felt as though he were standing at the precipice of a vast abyss, yet also at the dawn of an inner revolution. The decision before him was not merely a moment of bravery, but a pivotal turning point, a silent pact with the unknown that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. In his mind, the logical choice might have been to retreat into familiar comforts, but the allure of discovery was far too potent to resist. Every instinct, every heartbeat, spoke of a destiny beyond the mundane, a destiny written in the cryptic language of the relic itself. With trembling resolve, John extended a cautious hand toward the artifact. In that final, charged heartbeat before contact, he knew that his choice was irreversible. The act of reaching out was not just a physical motion but a symbolic crossing, an acceptance of the fact that he was about to leave behind the comforting certainties of his former life. The transformation began not with a cataclysmic event, but in this subtle, deeply personal moment of decision. A moment of pure, unguarded commitment to embrace a journey that promised both untold peril and the possibility of profound self-discovery. The air around him began to change long before his foot crossed any threshold. In that surreal moment, the world he had always known started unraveling in the most subtle yet unsettling ways. A soft, almost imperceptible tremor rippled through the familiar surroundings, a trembling of light as it fell unevenly across surfaces that had once been inert. The steady glow from street lamps and the predictable cadence of sunsets, hues now fractured into bizarre patterns, as if shards of broken light were dancing over the edges of every object. Walls, windows, and doorways appeared to bend and twist in ways that defied expectation, dissolving ordinary angles into a cascade of fluctuating silhouettes. Every sound carried a disquieting new resonance. The gentle hum of everyday life, the murmur of distant traffic, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, was supplanted by ghostly echoes that reverberated in empty corners. Each echo seemed to come alive with a presence that was both alien and accusatory, whispering disjointed phrases that hinted at long-forgotten memories and impending dread. It was as if the sounds of his past were blending with the ambient noise, creating an auditory tapestry where every note struck a chord of uncertainty. This cacophony did not simply fill the silence. It warped it, making every whispered sound both a beckon and a warning that something was irreversibly amiss. The change wasn't confined to light and sound alone. The familiar air, once redolent with the scents of fresh rain and cut grass, now carried an almost metallic tang, a foretaste of decay intermingled with something ancient and foreboding. Each inhalation felt like drawing in a mixture of memories and secrets, punctuated by an undeniable undercurrent of imminent change. The very texture of the atmosphere, thick and charged, lent a physical weight to the sensations, as if the space itself had grown heavy with unspoken truths. Even the solidity of his physical environment betrayed signs of transformation. Sidewalks that had cradled countless steps began to subtly shift underfoot, their surface rippling ever so slightly like water disturbed by an unseen current. Familiar landmarks lost their customary clarity, their outlines blurred into transient shapes that faded in and out of focus. The horizon itself, once a clear demarcation between earth and sky, seemed to waver like a mirage, hinting at a realm where natural laws no longer held sway. Every shift in perception underscored a growing tension, a palpable pull that urged him deeper into the unknown. It was as though the gradual decay of the comforting normalcy around him was a silent invitation, a dangerous allure to peer farther into a reality that had long lurked behind the veneer of everyday life. In that charged atmosphere, every altered detail seemed to announce the beginning of an irreversible departure from normalcy, a slow, inexorable detachment from the world he had so reliably known. Here, in the midst of shifting lights, echoing sounds, and a heavy, uncertain air, the simple act of witnessing the disintegration of the familiar became a lesson in the fragility of reality itself. A stark reminder that the boundaries we rely on are often the first to crumble when faced with the profound mysteries lurking just beyond perception. John stepped forward, each footfall marking an irrevocable break from the world he once knew. In the instant his boot cleared the familiar stone threshold, a frigid wave washed over him, a sudden, bone-deep cold that made the very air seem to crystallize. The warmth he had taken for granted evaporated, leaving behind an atmosphere charged with a spectral chill. It was as if the very fabric of his existence had been rewoven, substituting known comfort with the raw, unsettling promise of something entirely alien. The ground beneath him no longer presented the solid, reassuring terrain of his past life, but instead shifted and quivered with an eerie fluidity. What had been a trusted path now unfurled into a labyrinth of distorted surfaces, a patchwork of smooth expanses abruptly interrupted by areas that felt spongy and insubstantial. With every step, the boundaries between solidity and illusion blurred. The earth itself seemed to pulse underfoot, emitting a slow, rhythmic vibration that resonated with his pounding heart, drawing him ever deeper into the uncharted realm. Fleeting shadows danced at the edges of his vision, their forms transient and ghost-like. One moment, a clear, dark silhouette arched along a warped line. The next, it dissolved into a haze of light and gloom. These spectral figures shifted with a disorienting unpredictability, as though the very essence of light had rebelled against its duty, a silent reminder that the rules of this place were dictated by forces far beyond mortal comprehension. The landscape, too, had surrendered to this chaos. Familiar horizons melted into bizarre vistas where angles contorted in impossible geometries and depths folded upon themselves in surreal, almost liquid arcs. As he advanced, The perceptible drop in temperature was accompanied by a curious alteration in sound. Each step seemed to mute the ambience of his old world, replaced instead by an otherworldly silence punctuated by distant, almost musical echoes. The whispers of his own movement ricocheted off unseen walls, merging with the low, resonant hum of a realm that existed in perpetual half-light. The sensation was disorienting. His very body felt as if it were resonating with this new environment, a fragile conduit between the tangible and the ineffable. The crossing was not merely a physical act. It was a transformation enacted upon his senses. His skin prickled with each rush of cold air, and every shift in the ground sent ripples of strange energy coursing through his limbs. It was as if the simple act of moving forward demanded a recalibration of every fiber, a surrendering of the old self to a reality where even his own body seemed to be a stranger. The space around him fluctuated with an uncanny dynamism, a cacophony of muted colors and shifting contours that defied definition, all converging into a singular, unsettling promise of radical change. In that singular, breath-stealing moment, each detail of the passage, the chill, the trembling ground, the erratic interplay of shadow and light, spoke unequivocally of a journey that could never be undone. John's step out of the known was a precise incision into a world governed by different laws, a moment where reality itself seemed both fragile and infinitely mutable. John's breath came in short, halting bursts as the very air around him seemed to pulse with an unnerving cadence. With each measured step forward, the ground beneath his feet shifted under an unseen force, a subtle tremor that resonated with the stirring depths of his own mind. He sensed that this crossing was not merely a movement through uncharted physical space, but rather an uneasy journey into the labyrinth of his inner self, where familiar thoughts dissolved into a haze of doubt and suppressed memories. In that suspended moment, John's thoughts began to unravel like loose threads, each one pulling him deeper into introspection. The world he left behind, clear, predictable, and comforting, faded as an ambiguous mist of nostalgia and regret enveloped him. It was as if the boundaries between the external realm and the corridors of his consciousness had become indistinguishable. The vibrant hues of his past mingled with dim, unsettling shades of his forgotten fears. His mind, usually so adept at distinguishing reality from illusion, now questioned every sensation that tickled his skin and every echo that whispered his name. He recalled fragments of his earlier life as though they were scenes from a half-remembered dream. The steady hum of routine, the reassuring weight of certainty. Each memory was tinged with a longing that both soothed and terrified him. Yet, as these recollections surfaced, they were swiftly overtaken by a profound sense of displacement. In this new realm, his inner dialogue grew louder, each thought and emotion mirrored by a distorted, external reflection in the shifting environment. The walls of his rational mind began to crumble as existential questions rose. Was he truly venturing beyond the physical confines of his world, or had he merely stepped into a vast, inner theater where his deepest insecurities played out in vivid, unsettling color? Every element of his senses conspired to heighten his disorientation. A chill, unfamiliar and uncomfortably intimate, crept along his spine as if it were a physical representation of the dread clawing at his heart. Simultaneously, a fleeting warmth would surge unexpectedly, an echo of lost joy, mingled with an inexplicable melancholy that hinted at burdens long carried in solitude. These conflicting sensations, both tender and tormenting, became metaphors for the dual nature of his journey, moving away from the tangible and descending into the murky waters of his own psyche. The rhythmic cadence of his inner musings, punctuated by an ever-intensifying fear, formed a dissonant symphony that blurred the lines between body and soul. In that charged space, time seemed both to stretch infinitely and collapse into a singular, profound moment of realization. There was no simple passage from the known to the unknown, only a gradual merging where the physical act of crossing echoed with the reverberations of every hidden thought and emotion buried within him. With every step into the shadow-laden unknown, John confronted an inescapable truth, that his external journey was inseparably bound to a deeper, personal exploration, one that would forever alter the contours of his identity. John's final step into the unfathomable was not merely movement but a shattering of every known boundary. In the charged silence of that moment, the remnants of his past life trembled in the thinning light, as if they wished to cling on one last time. The air pulsed with an eerie, rhythmic pull, a palpable force that seemed to cradle him while simultaneously wrenching him away from everything he had once understood. Every instinct screamed that this passage was not a simple crossing but a consummate severing of all ties to the world he knew. As he advanced, his body tingled with the searing touch of a cold, spectral energy that defied the laws of nature he once took for granted. The normalcy of familiar surroundings was dissolving into a landscape of shifting shadows and distorted echoes. A deep awareness blossomed within him. There was no retreat from this force, no hope for reclaiming what was left behind. The swirling mists and spectral luminescence of the relic danced on his skin, transforming the space around him into a realm where color and substance merged into a disquieting haze, a twilight canvas that betrayed all semblances of order. In that interminable heartbeat, John's mind registered not only the loss of physical ground but also the dissolution of a once firm identity. He felt his past slip away like grains of sand through trembling fingers, leaving behind the comforting yet confining contours of a life defined by routine. It was as though every memory, every familiar scent and sound, was unmoored, cast adrift on the tide of an overwhelming, otherworldly current. The threshold he crossed was more than a mere line in space. It was the disintegration of his very connection to reality, an irrevocable leap into the unknown where hope and horror intermingled. A profound stillness settled as the final vestiges of his old reality receded into an indistinct blur. With every step, the protective shroud of certainty fell away, replaced by the oppressive, unyielding cadence of raw, elemental forces that seemed to whisper of desperate challenges ahead. The environment around him was a living enigma. Shadows elongated unnaturally, and muted echoes resonated as if spoken by countless unseen entities, each echo reinforcing the gravity of his irreversible choice. In that surreal interplay of light and darkness, John felt an inner transformation, an unsettling awareness that he was irrevocably remade, his being now attuned to the cryptic, treacherous rhythms of this new realm. At this point of no return, the very essence of his world cracked and dissolved, leaving him suspended in a liminal space charged with both terror and revelation. The atmosphere reeked of imminent peril, a whispered promise of trials and metamorphoses that loomed like specters in the half-light. In that haunting silence, the energy of the realm bore into him, inscribing a final, indelible truth. His journey forward would forever sever the ties to a past defined by normalcy, plunging him into an existence where every shadow might harbor an unforeseen hazard and every distorted sound could signal a new descent into the depths of the unknown. Reflections in Twilight. Confronted by distorted images of himself, John grapples with his identity in a world that refuses to adhere to logic. The space around John defies simple description, a realm where every surface appears to be in a state of constant becoming. An almost imperceptible, oscillating glow fills the area, as if the light itself pulses in sync with breaths that could be heard if one listened closely. The ambient illumination is erratic, at times soft and diffuse, at others harsh enough to reveal the jagged outlines of forms that might once have been familiar. Here, the world is an ever-shifting canvas where logic melts into a palette of abstract shapes and fractured images. Wandering deeper into this disorienting expanse, one finds that the conventional markers of reality have yielded to enigmatic reflections. At scattered intervals, broken fragments of reflective surfaces, old mirrors, tarnished metal shards, and even puddles of an unknown liquid offer fleeting glimpses of distorted familiarity. These fragments twist and stretch any image they capture, so that a simple face becomes an unsettling amalgam of softened edges and exaggerated features. In these surfaces, the hints of John's identity are warped. Every ripple in the glass seems to echo an unspoken admission of fears that have long lain dormant. As he moves, the reflections shift with a physicality that suggests the mirrors are not merely passive observers, but active participants in the unfolding of a deeper psychological narrative. The interplay of dim light and deep shadow here is more akin to a living performance than a natural phenomenon. Shadows seem to breathe, pulsating slowly as though drawing sustenance from the very atmosphere. They drift across uneven surfaces and coalesce into vague shapes that recede just at the threshold of recognition. This peculiar animation of darkness creates a constant tension. The promise of clarity is always deferred, leaving only hints of a hidden truth in these elusive silhouettes. The environment, in its relentless mutability, forces a confrontation with one's internal disarray, mirroring the chaos of thoughts and long-suppressed emotions. At the same time, a subtle quality permeates this otherworldly setting, an insistence that the familiar can no longer be trusted. Every gleam, every shadow, serves as an implicit lesson in the fragility of identity and the tenuous nature of memory. The very air seems to distort sound and vision. Echoes are caught in perpetual loops, and reflections appear to carry whispers of a past that exists only in the recesses of a fading mind. In such an atmosphere, the external world becomes an allegory for the inner landscape, where each irregular flicker of light and ripple in a fractured mirror offers an invitation to examine personal history and the many forms that the self can assume. Within this surreal environment, the boundaries that once demarcated the concrete from the imagined are completely eroded, leaving John suspended in a realm where the only certainty is the elusive interplay of dim illumination and living shadow. This space, with its dreamlike ambiguity and inherent tension, lays the groundwork for an intimate exploration of self, a place where the distortion of the external world is inseparably linked to the internal struggle of reconciling one's true identity with the myriad reflections that emerge from deep-seated memories and unspoken fears. John's first glimpse into his altered reflection was both mesmerizing and unsettling. In a narrow stretch of murky light, the surface before him, an old, fractured mirror embedded in the warped wall of his surroundings, seemed alive with an eerie motion. At first, he recognized the contour of his face. Yet even then, something was amiss. The familiar features began to warp slowly. The angles of his jaw shifted into impossibly elongated lines while his eyes, usually clear and steady, flickered with a spectral shimmer. It was as if the mirror was not merely showing him who he had been but was aggressively reconfiguring each detail to reveal hidden fractures in his identity. As he watched, the reflection twisted and stretched unpredictably, evoking the sensation of an image caught between two worlds. One moment, his expression morphed into a figure of vulnerable sorrow, a reflection that hinted at long-buried regrets and moments of despair he had never fully acknowledged. A flicker later, that very image contorted into an exaggerated form of determination, marked by features that spoke of unspoken fears and secrets locked away in the recesses of his mind. There was no seamless continuity between these manifestations. Rather, each shift carried the weight of untold histories, as if the mirror were channeling echoes of his inner turmoil. The shifting images were not mere technical anomalies or tricks played by errant light. They felt deliberately orchestrated, each anomaly hinting at the inner landscape of his psyche. In the first encounter, the reflection's form slid unnaturally into a version of himself that seemed to embody the parts he had long suppressed. The rigid lines of his face melted into an abstract representation, where the proportions exaggerated his anxieties and the latent scars of past failures. With a slow, deliberate flux, the reflective surface became a theater for his hidden self, a self that was both too daunting and too raw to confront head-on. The scene compelled him to pause and listen to the silent narrative unfolding before him. Every flicker of distortion taught him that what he saw was more than a flawed image. It was a map of suppressed feelings and unresolved memories. The anomalies in his reflection were like a series of cryptic lessons, each one urging him to acknowledge the parts of his identity that had been locked away, fragments of grief, pain, hope, and resilience. It was an invitation to examine his past and the fearful impulses he routinely denied in the name of normalcy. In that moment, as the distorted images danced and separated into multiple, conflicting versions of his self, John felt a stirring understanding. The relentless metamorphosis before him was not a random aberration, but a deliberate manifestation of his most intimate inner truth. It was a visual allegory for the way his mind had compartmentalized, and often rejected parts of who he truly was. Standing before the animated mirror, he realized that these fractured reflections offered a profound insight. True self-awareness would only come by embracing every distorted shard of his being, no matter how disquieting they might appear. John stared fixedly at the shifting image before him, a visage both familiar and alien. The reflection, distorted and contorted, writhed as if alive, an unwelcome mirror of his hidden self. His mind whispered questions in a low, insistent tone. What is the origin of this warping? Is it merely an aberration of light and shadow, or does it hold a deeper meaning, an unspoken truth? As he leaned closer, the dialogue within him swelled into a palpable contest. Look at yourself, his clearer voice urged, a call for self-acceptance. Acknowledge every fracture, every scar that lies hidden beneath this shifting surface. But quickly, a defensive murmur countered, resistant and pained. They should not be seen. These parts of you remain buried for protection. Memories bubbled unexpectedly as the contorted reflection became a trigger, unspooling vivid flashbacks of a childhood shadowed by isolation, of whispered family arguments dissolving into silence, and of moments when hope had curdled into despair. Each memory surfaced with a force that threatened to overwhelm him, a bittersweet reminder of a history he had long tried to forget. In that internal theater, reason and impulse clashed. The rational mind analyzed the phantom images, questioning their scientific validity, pondering whether they were merely the result of light refracting through uneven glass. These illusions, though unsettling, are subject to scrutiny, it intoned, proposing the existence of a mechanism, a frail psychological defense, that allowed repression to manifest on a visual stage. Yet even as this reasoning flowed, his instinctive self roiled in opposition, its tone deep and impassioned. These are you, raw, unfiltered, and refusing to be denied. Embrace them, for they are the echo of every unhealed wound. The internal dialogue grew feverish. Each word exchanged in his mind summoned forgotten moments. A bitter argument with a trusted friend, a moment of loss so profound it left him numb, the silent screams of failures unspoken. These memories, once dormant and hidden, now pricked at the surface with an urgency that could not be ignored. With each pulse of recollection, the distorted reflections seemed to whisper, demanding acknowledgement. Their silent testimony challenged him to confront the cumulative weight of all that had been repressed. In this crucible of thought and remembrance, John realized that the battle between rational dissection and instinctive rebellion was not merely a conflict but a necessary reckoning. The reflections were not errant distortions to be discarded. They were messengers carrying the truths of his past. And so, caught in the flux between self-denial and acceptance, he stood at a threshold. The conversation within him demanded a choice: to either integrate these splintered images into a unified sense of self or persist in the futile attempt to outrun the raw truth they carried. John's surroundings dissolve into an ever-shifting tapestry of light and shadow, where every broken surface seems to fracture not only his image but also the integrity of his very sense of self. In these transient reflections, he witnesses more than a mere echo of his external appearance. He sees vivid metaphors for the trauma that has long festered within him. Each warped contour, a face stretching into grotesque expressions or a silhouette that shudders with unfamiliar energy, evokes the suppressed memories and regrets that have haunted him silently over the years. In these moments of forced introspection, the reflections act as uninvited mirrors to his inner demons. They exaggerate features that he might have once tried to dismiss. The deep lines of sorrow etched by past disappointments, the subtle distortions that hint at lost innocence, and even the flickering shadows that symbolize parts of himself he has long denied. These images, ever-changing and unreliable, offer no comfort or clarity. Instead, they challenge the notion that identity is fixed or wholly knowable. What he sees is not necessarily the truth of who he is, but rather an amalgam of his deepest fears, the part of him that clings to pain and vulnerability. At times, the reflections seem to rebel against the smooth continuity of memory. Their unstable nature questions the solidity of his recollections, exposing the fragility of his grasp on reality. Shadows merge with light in patterns that defy logical order, and familiar features rearrange themselves in a macabre dance of distortion. Herein lies a profound irony. While the reflections attempt to present him as he once was, they ultimately reveal that his memories have fractured over time, each shard imbued with its own sorrow and uncertainty. This dissonance between what he remembers and what is portrayed in these fractured images forces him to confront a disconcerting possibility, that his self-perception is as mutable and deceptive as the distorted figures before him. The interplay between these unreliable images and his fading recollections injects a philosophical tension into his journey. The very act of seeing, once a simple, reliable conduit for truth, now becomes a complex dialogue between past and present, reality and illusion. In this reflective crucible, John is compelled to question whether his identity is a tangible entity that can be pinned down by memory, or if it is an ever-evolving construct, shaped equally by past wounds and the persistent echo of unrealized fears. The reflections suggest that what he perceives may not be a faithful reproduction of the man he was, but rather a distorted construct spun from the threads of anxiety and regret. Ultimately, these elusive reflections serve as both tormentor and teacher. They compel him to reckon with a fundamental truth, that the self is not a static portrait, but a living, breathing mosaic formed of every suppressed emotion, every unspoken regret, and every fear that warps reality at its edges. In accepting this, he is invited to embrace the complexity of his identity, however fragmented it may be, and to acknowledge that even the most distorted image holds a lesson, one that might ultimately guide him toward a more integrated, if still ever-changing, understanding of who he truly is. John stood transfixed as the distorted images before him began to shift and writhe, each one a grotesque rendition of the man he once believed he knew. In the wavering half-light of this disorienting realm, his reflection fractured into countless twisted versions, each one pulsing with a quiet, beckoning urgency. The mirror-like surface, slick with nebulous moisture, rendered his features into elongated shadows and unsettling smears of color. These were not mere reflections but manifestations, fragmented echoes of his past, his suppressed regrets, and the quietly persistent vestiges of his identity. A deep, internal dialogue churned within him. His rational mind battled the raw emotion that surged in tandem with each shifting image. "Are you truly a part of me?" he whispered, voice barely audible over the irregular sighing of the dark mist that filled the space around him. Every flicker and contortion invited him to confront truths that had long lain buried beneath carefully constructed defenses. In that transient moment between recognition and revulsion, the challenge was laid starkly before him, to integrate these fragmented aspects of himself as essential pieces of a larger, albeit troubled, whole, or to cast them aside as unwelcome distortions, dangerous trickery of a realm intent on unhinging his sanity. As if answering his silent question, one particularly vivid reflection, a version of him marked by sorrowful eyes and trembling determination, stepped forward, merging with the other broken images. Its presence felt like an emissary from a part of his soul he had long avoided. The sensation was electric, a collision of an overwhelming personal history and the cold, indifferent logic of the surreal environment. John's internal conflict intensified with every heartbeat. The notion of acknowledging and assimilating these multiple facets promised a harsh confrontation with memories laden with guilt, regret, and unspoken desires, yet it whispered of a newfound authenticity that his carefully curated self had never achieved. Trembling, John reached out a hand, his fingers grazing the cool, slick surface as if daring to merge with these spectral identities. The touch sparked a cascade of memories, fleeting flashes of joy, torment, and resilience, that swirled together, imbuing him with both a profound vulnerability and a defiant strength. In that charged moment, the choice crystallized. Should he welcome every fractured shard into his very being, confronting the painful truths and tender hopes interwoven in them, or should he reject these reflections as malign distortions, remnants of an invasive force that sought only to unmoor his spirit? The atmosphere held its breath as he hesitated, caught between the magnetic pull of self-acceptance and the instinctive urge to reject a reality that threatened to overwhelm him. His eyes locked with the sorrowful visage once more, a face that seemed to plead for integration rather than dismissal. In that silent, heart-thumping instant, the boundaries blurred. The decision was not clear-cut, nor did it require immediate resolution. Instead, the ambivalence itself became his truth, a quiet acknowledgement that this internal schism would continue to shape him, guiding his future steps into further realms of transformation. And so, as the reflections swirled around him like ghosts of forgotten selves, John lingered in that ambiguous twilight, a fragile truce between embracing and rejecting the myriad echoes of his identity, the choice hanging in the balance as the dark realm whispered on. The grotesque menagerie. As he encounters nightmarish creatures, John learns the terrifying truth about their hunger and purpose. John stepped cautiously into a narrow corridor that opened into a clearing where the air felt unnaturally dense. Immediately, a tangible weight pressed against his chest as a subtle, otherworldly chill replaced the familiar night's coolness. The oppressive atmosphere brought with it a series of barely discernible sounds, soft, almost imperceptible whispers and low murmurs that hinted at voices lingering in the void. Each step forward deepened the sensation of entering a place where the normal cadence of life had been replaced by an eerie, unpredictable pulse. A faint, inconsistent glow began to emerge from somewhere beyond the immediate darkness, revealing that the ground beneath his feet was uneven and laced with patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly. The intermittent light came from flickering motes that drifted like fireflies caught in a net of shadows, each pulse of illumination suggesting the presence of something watching from just beyond the threshold of sight. The interplay of light and dark created an unsettling silhouette on the walls of the corridor, as if the very fabric of the space were writhing with secret life. As John advanced, the sounds resolved into an almost rhythmic series of guttural intonations. The echoes resonated off unseen surfaces, crafting an auditory landscape that teased at his perceptions. It wasn't long before he sensed that these sounds were not random. They carried a foreboding pattern, a reminder that whatever inhabited the darkness had a presence that was both deliberate and alert. The murmurs were punctuated by irregular pauses, as if the space itself was holding its breath in anticipation of an inevitable revelation. Every subtle detail contributed to a growing awareness that he was intruding into territory where unseen watchers lurked. The air vibrated with a suppressed energy that made his skin prickle. In fleeting instances, shapes seemed to materialize at the edges of his vision, a movement too deliberate to be the mere play of shadows. A particularly distinct shift of darkness, like a ripple along a still pond, confirmed that John was not moving alone. An uncanny sensation gripped him, an intuition that an unseen presence, neither wholly solid nor entirely spectral, floated amid the murk, silently collecting every subtle nuance of his arrival. The corridor's silence was intermittently broken not just by the mysterious voices, but by the soft rustling of what might have been movement. A quiet sliding sound as if something elongated and formless was gliding gracefully yet purposefully behind the obscured corners. Each sound carried the weight of an impending realization that this clearing was not a natural pause in his journey, but a threshold to hidden depths. As the light dimmed and reappeared unpredictably, it cast eerie, dancing shadows that deepened the mystery. The interplay of unsteady light and persistent sound ensured that every instinct in John's body screamed of the imminent approach of something ancient and indescribable. In that charged moment, every sensory detail, each flicker of light, every echoing sound, communicated the same silent warning. He was venturing into a realm where the presence of something else was undeniable, where darkness breathed along with him, and where the known world was slipping into a dreamlike, oppressive, and utterly unfamiliar reality. John's heart pounded as he stepped into a space where darkness was not merely an absence of light but a presence itself, a throbbing, malignant force. In this eerie clearing, the fog seemed to breathe, parting just enough to reveal figures that defied natural order. Before him slithered a collection of beings whose very existence overwhelmed the senses. Each creature emerged as an aberrant symphony of contortions and shadows. Their forms were misshapen, as if every limb was sculpted by a nightmare rather than by nature's careful hand, and these limbs trembled in a perpetual state of disequilibrium. The creatures' bodies writhed with a life that was not entirely organic, their sinewy contours rippling beneath skin that shimmered with an otherworldly, unsteady luminescence. Each muscle and membrane seemed to perform in a grotesque dance, a perverse ballet of unyielding fluidity that oscillated between repulsion and a strangely morbid allure. The architecture of their flesh was as brutal as it was bizarre. Unexpected angles and disjointed proportions created a visual cacophony that both repelled and beguiled the observer, hinting at a beauty born from despair and decay. Dominating their distorted visages were eyes that shone like shards of cold, alien crystal small, unblinking orbs which glimmered with a predatory intelligence that made it clear these were creatures of calculated menace. Their gazes were incisive and unsettling, each pair probing the darkness with an uncanny awareness, as if intent on unearthing every secret fear that lurked within John's soul. In the interplay of light and shadow, these eyes revealed flickers of a deep, ancient malice, promising that this nightmarish assembly was both sentinel and executioner in a realm where terror was currency. Even as their physical forms invoked horror, hints of a disturbing beauty shimmered through the decay. At times, the creature's skin would catch the scant light, revealing complex patterns and subtle gradients reminiscent of a darkly stained tapestry. There was an almost hypnotic quality in the way these patterns shifted with every movement, suggesting that amid the grotesque distortions, a perverse order reigned, a testament to the mysterious forces that had weaved these beings into existence. This surreal splendor did nothing to soften the repulsion. Instead, it deepened the enigma, forcing John to confront the unsettling notion that beauty and horror might be two sides of the same corrupted coin. Accompanying their every deliberate, sinuous motion was a faint, unearthly susurration, a mixture of wet shuffling and soft, almost musical croaks that filled the oppressive silence. These sounds, both rhythmic and chaotic, lent the scene a disconcerting soundtrack, one that resonated as an echo of the ancient and unfathomable energy permeating the realm. The creatures moved with a deliberate grace, each gesture a testament to the realm's power to twist even the natural laws of life, transforming mere predators into symbols of forgotten nightmares. In that suffocating moment, as John's gaze locked with those alien eyes and his mind teetered between terror and reluctant fascination, the grotesque menagerie unveiled itself not as random horrors but as a living allegory, a vivid reflection of insecurities, suppressed memories, and the dark, indelible mark of a realm where every twisted form spoke of secrets too terrible to forget. John's encounter with these loathsome creatures forces him to confront the darker corridors of his soul, a mirror to his very being. Each aberrant figure pulsates with an energy that seems to encapsulate a unique, unspoken terror, as though every contorted limb and soulless eye is not merely a product of the realm's ancient curse but a manifestation of a long-buried part of his inner psyche. In their grotesque forms, these creatures embody the primal fears that have silently governed his waking thoughts, the quiet dread of failure, the lingering sorrow of past mistakes, and the gnawing anxiety of confronting one's inadequacies. The shapes that slither and shift in the dim light are not random aberrations. They carry an eerie symbolism that beckons the observer to look inward. One creature, with its fluid movement and webbed, twisted appendages, might be seen as the embodiment of suppressed grief, a living allegory for the weight of unacknowledged loss that John has carried throughout his life. Its ever-changing form reflects the instability of his emotional landscape, suggesting that the creature is not merely a predator in the physical sense, but a constant reminder of the vulnerability hidden within him. Similarly, another creature, its eyes glinting with an uncanny, almost accusatory intelligence, appears to personify the deep-seated guilt and self-doubt that have haunted him since childhood. The creature's gaze seems to question every decision John has ever made, its presence forcing him to reckon with the parts of himself he has long wished to ignore. As the unsettling dance of these monstrous figures unfolds, a subtle but undeniable connection to the ancient artifact becomes apparent. The creatures are not solely independent horrors. Rather, they seem to be inextricably linked with the artifact's corruptive power, as though birthed from its malefic influence. This connection hints at a duality in the realm, a bridge, however dark, between the physical terror that haunts him and the internal torment that he has spent a lifetime concealing. They are in effect dual agents, extending the artifact's reach into the inner sanctum of his thoughts and fears, solidifying their existence as both external predators and internal demons. In their every movement and unsettling presence, the creatures serve as metaphoric shadows of John's own hidden darkness. Their contorted figures, far from being mere aberrations of flesh, are visual metaphors for the unresolved traumas and pervasive insecurities that lurk within him. They force him to question if the terror he experiences is only cast from the external horror of the realm, or if it is a reflection, an externalization, of the fears and vulnerabilities he has never dared to confront. As John observes, the creatures pulse with a disturbing intensity that suggests a unity between the realm's corrupted energy and the reservoir of darkness within his own soul, an undeniable chorus of despair that resounds at every turn. This unsettling mirroring between the grotesque menagerie and his inner struggles underscores a profound lesson. The true horror may not lie solely in the monstrous forms stalking him in the shadows, but also in the unspoken parts of his spirit that they represent. In this eerie communion, the external phenomenon of predation is merely a grotesque echo of internal strife, a critical reflection of the self that dares not be fully admitted. As John grapples with the revelations these creatures evoke, he is forced into a reckoning with his own identity, his buried sorrows, and the corrosive power of suppressed fear, setting him on a collision course with the very essence of who he truly is. In the oppressive gloom of the clearing, John's pulse raced as he observed the creatures' deliberate, predatory motions. Their forms, though grotesque and contorted beyond natural design, moved with a precision that belied any semblance of chaos. In that eerie half-light, it became unmistakably clear that these beings were not simply wandering nightmares but were driven by an appetite that defied the usual needs of flesh and blood. Instead of aiming to satisfy basic, corporeal hunger, each creature appeared to be engaged in a dark, ritualistic quest to siphon off the very essence of what made its victims human. As John watched, a subtle yet distinct pattern began to emerge. The creatures would pause momentarily near those who trembled with fear or were visibly burdened by despair. In those brief interludes, their eyes shimmered with an almost hypnotic gleam, as if absorbing the terror that radiated from their prey. This was no accidental act of predation. It was a deliberate and calculated extraction of something far less tangible than physical matter. Their undulating, sinewy forms seemed tuned to detect the pervasive aura of anxiety and hopelessness that clung to every heart still beating amidst the dread. The sensation that gripped John went beyond mere exposure to grotesque appearances. He sensed that these entities were orchestrated by a force deeper than instinct, a transcendent hunger instigated by the very fabric of this cursed realm. The realization slowly dawned upon him. These beings consumed intangible elements such as fear, despair, and the faint, flickering remnants of human hope. This was a feeding process that gnawed at the soul, diminishing its vitality one dreadful morsel at a time. It was as if each creature, with every cautious step and each silent, predatory pause, sought to drain its target of the internal light that defined their essence. There was an unsettling beauty in their methodical approach, a dance of darkness meticulously choreographed by forces beyond ordinary comprehension. In their silent vigil, the creatures exuded an aura that resonated with the sorrow and existential terror of the realm itself, almost as if they were the corporeal manifestations of the artifact's malign influence. This ancient power, pulsing at the core of this nightmarish dimension, seemed to imbue the creatures with a purpose, to erode the very foundation of hope and human resilience. John realized that their insatiable hunger was less about survival and more about the systematic, almost ritualistic consumption of what made each captured soul unique. By slowly unraveling this mystery, John understood that every contorted limb and every uncanny, predatory gesture was a clear indicator of an underlying design. A design purposely engineered to strip away the emotional and psychological defenses of those ensnared in this realm. The relentless pursuit of intangible sustenance came across less as chaos and more as an inevitable, almost metaphysical process of deprivation, leaving behind a void where once human warmth and vitality had existed. In the silent communion of fear and despair, John saw a grim reflection of his own inner turmoil, a mirror to his deepest vulnerabilities, and the ultimate lesson in the cruel, unyielding nature of this dreadful domain. John staggered into a silence that was as heavy as lead, every beat of his heart echoing in the abyss left behind by the ghastly figures. The realization that what he had just witnessed was not an isolated horror but the raw, unfiltered reflection of deeper, unresolved fears shook him to his core. In that bleak instant, he understood that these grotesque beings were not simply predators roaming a realm of desolation, but a manifestation of the consuming despair churning within him. Their deformed visages, with eyes that held an unsettling predatory glint, seemed to articulate a silent verdict against the parts of him he had long buried, those too raw to face in the light of day. As he stood shrouded in the residual gloom, John's thoughts began to churn. Was it possible that each contorted limb and every distorted movement was not solely the work of an ancient, malevolent force but also a mirror reflecting his own inner demons? In the oppressive quiet that followed their macabre display, he wrestled with the chilling possibility that these creatures were schematic blueprints of his suppressed vulnerabilities, the physical embodiments of guilt, regret, and fear that had festered beneath the surface of his mundane existence. Their hunger, he realized, stretched far beyond an instinct for physical sustenance. It was a ravenous appetite for the intangible, the terror of an unfulfilled life, the despair of lost hope, the decay of what once was familiar. The truth began to crystallize amidst the darkness. In every deranged twist of their grotesque forms lay a lesson, that the world he now traversed was a tapestry of external horrors interwoven with the intimate, internal failings of the human psyche. The creatures had not come solely to terrorize him. They had come to unmask him, to force him into an unbidden confrontation with the parts of his soul he had long kept at bay. As he pondered this, a silent, almost clinical introspection took root within him. Am I to believe, he wondered, that these abominations exist solely to prey on my dread, or are they a symbolic reckoning for the darkness I harbor inside? The question resonated in the cavernous quiet, blurring the lines between the terror without and the terror within. In that weighty moment of introspection, every fiber of his being recoiled and reached out simultaneously. A desperate pull towards the remnants of the man he once was, and an inescapable descent further into the uncharted depths of his own haunting. The revelations urged him to face a choice: to retreat into the comforting lie of ordinary existence, or to embrace the brutal truths ignited by this encounter. This terrifying meeting with the grotesque menagerie delineated the crucial juncture of his journey, a pivot where confronting the monstrous shadows both around him and within him would become the only path towards reclaiming his humanity. It was in this balance, between paralyzing fear and the dawning clarity of self-awareness, that John realized his journey had irrevocably transformed. The path ahead promised neither easy shelter nor joyful redemption, only the stark, unyielding challenge of understanding his own inner darkness as a necessary step toward emerging whole once more. Echoes of dread. Whispers from the shadows reveal hidden fears, challenging John's understanding of reality and sanity. A low, almost imperceptible murmur weaves through the oppressive darkness, as if the very shadows have gathered to commune in a language older than memory. In the space where light hesitates to intrude, John finds himself surrounded by a chorus of faint voices, each ripple of sound carrying an indeterminate weight. These whispers do not scream or howl. Instead, they softly infiltrate his senses, a disembodied cadence that ebbs and flows like the tide against a crumbling shore. Each subtle exhalation of sound seems to coax the secrets of the abyss closer, inviting him to listen even as dread coils tighter within his chest. The quality of these uttered echoes is peculiar, lacking the crisp clarity of spoken words, yet leaving an inexplicable imprint of meaning that resonates with a hint of suppressed sorrow and ancient despair. Every barely audible syllable, overlapping and distorting in the cool, stagnant air, appears to be a fragment from a story long abandoned, a tale of loss and regret that the darkness itself refuses to forget. In this spectral symphony, there is no single discernible voice. Rather, a multitude of half-formed phrases drift around him, as though they are the fading remnants of countless lost conversations. As John stands in the midst of this disorienting soundscape, the whispers seem to emanate not only from the air but from the very fabric of the surrounding gloom. They originate in the peripheries of his vision, seeping in through the crevices of warped reality like insidious trickles of thought. The voices overlap with one another, creating a layered soundscape that blurs the distinction between an external phenomenon and the inner tremors of his psyche. In moments of silent introspection, the murmurs morph into a haunting refrain, a relentless reminder that the darkness is never empty but always filled with the echoes of immeasurable grief. There is an almost hypnotic cadence to these sounds, a rhythm that mirrors the fragile pulse of John's own heart. Each ephemeral whisper veils a cryptic invitation to recall memories buried beneath a lifetime of routine, memories that now mingle with the pervasive sadness of this realm. The sound is at once transient and persistent, like a half-remembered dream that both comforts and terrifies in equal measure. It leaves him pondering whether the murmurs are a product of external forces intent on erasing his sense of self, or merely the reflection of the internal dread that has long festered within him. Gradually, as the overlapping murmurs intensify in their subtle insistence, John begins to understand that every indistinguishable word carries with it the weight of unresolved anguish and a dire forewarning. These disembodied whispers are not random aberrations. They are the insidious echoes of hidden truths, carefully interwoven with the dark narrative of the realm. In their elusive cadence, the voices teach him that the boundaries between what is real and what is imagined are ever-shifting, a lesson that chills him to the bone as he braces himself for the revelations that these spectral murmurs promise to unveil. John's ears become the unwilling receptacle for voices that seem to rise from the very walls of a forgotten mausoleum, each murmur a thread in an unbidden tapestry of memory and sorrow. The soft cadences carry not only the unmistakable cadence of a bygone era, but also the weight of shared lament, a confluence of personal regret and a broader collective grief that transcends time. In these half-heard phrases, John perceives echoes of his own unspoken anguish mingled with the spectral sorrow of those who once dared to challenge the artifact's mysterious allure. Each syllable is drenched in an indefinable melancholy, as if the voices themselves were custodians of lost moments that refuse to fade, relentlessly whispering fragments of tragically beautiful histories. The voices do not speak in coherent sentences but in jumbled fragments. A stray word here, a mournful phrase there, each piece a remnant of memories strewn across the endless corridors of time. As the echoes continue, memories once locked away awaken with a sudden, heart-wrenching clarity. John finds himself reliving moments of love, betrayal, and profound isolation. Seemingly trivial details from a childhood marked by innocence now replete with a nostalgic longing that contrasts sharply with the oppressive dread of his surroundings. Strangely, the voices also invoke a shared sorrow, a deep, almost primordial collective grief that suggests that his pain is a singular note in a vast, somber chorus of despair echoing through those who suffered long before him. This auditory onslaught stirs a turbulent internal storm. With each whispered fragment, John's mind becomes a canvas where past and present blur into a kaleidoscope of imagery and emotion. A sudden memory of laughter now feels ghostly and forlorn, as if that remembered joy has been irreversibly tainted by loss. Overlapping voices conjure spectral images of mourning figures, faces etched with sorrow and eyes brimming with regrets, each silently pleading for acknowledgement of a suffering that lingers beyond the confines of mortal remembrance. The interplay of these fragmented recollections with the present torment leaves him gasping for breath, as if the weight of ancestral grief were pressing down on his very soul. In this moment, the realm's horror reveals itself not solely in grotesque apparitions or in the warped contours of the physical world, but in the fragile integrity of memory itself. The half-remembered words of these disembodied voices function as a mirror, reflecting back John's innermost vulnerabilities, while also revealing a panorama of shared historical despair. They serve as a relentless reminder that the pain he encounters is both uniquely his and, through an uncanny, inexorable bond, the sorrow that belongs to all who have ever been ensnared by the artifact's dark legacy. The murmurs are a form of silent pedagogy, urging him to confront memories long denied and illustrating that the true terror lies in the ability of grief to bridge the chasm between personal loss and a wider human experience, blurring the boundaries between individual suffering and the collective scars of an age-old malaise. The whispers coalesce into a relentless tide that invades every corner of his consciousness, stirring memories long thought to be buried. Each soft syllable seems to reach out in the darkness, dredging up fragments of regrets and faults that he had carefully locked away. The voices are not erratic or scattered. They carry an almost deliberate cadence, as if they know the precise pitch at which his defenses crack. With every understated murmur, the boundaries between his inner torment and the external dread that permeates this realm begin to blur. He listens as the disembodied sounds weave through his thoughts, intertwining with the very essence of his being. It is as if the realm itself has learned to speak the language of his soul, translating his hidden anxieties and long-forgotten remorse into a haunting chorus. In these moments, the whispers evolve from mere background noise into a profound dialogue, a relentless confrontation with the parts of himself he has avoided. Each echo draws a thin but noticeable line between what is real and what is a manifestation of his internal struggles. The experience is visceral, as though the voices have a physical presence that brushes against his skin, igniting chills that stem from the deep well of his personal history. Every whispered phrase is loaded with the weight of sorrow and guilt, summoning the specters of past failures and unhealed wounds. In this moment of exposure, he recognizes that these auditory apparitions are not just intruders from an inscrutable otherworld. They are his own suppressed emotions, given form by a space that feeds on vulnerability. The murmur of a regretful admission or a whisper laced with self-reproach becomes a tangible torment, one that blurs the line between an external horror and an internal siege. A sense of disquiet grows as he discerns the insidious nature of these murmurs, the knowledge that every sound is a reminder of the darkness festering within. The more he listens, the more he feels that the voices are orchestrated with a purpose, echoing the painful truths of his past, amplifying each misstep and every unresolved sorrow. The demarcation between his reality and these spectral invocations is smudged. His inner world seems to seep into this nightmarish landscape, where the terror that stares back at him is the reflection of his own concealed fears. In this state of suspended terror, he is forced to confront a deeply unsettling realization. The monstrous nature of his current surroundings is inseparable from the inner demons he has harbored. What terrifies him the most is not the unearthly presence that stalks the shadowy corridors of this realm, but the reckoning with his own psyche. The voices, subtle yet unyielding, serve as a mirror, a distorted, bleeding mirror, that reveals how the most relentless horrors are not those that lurk in unknown realms, but the internal afflictions that have always been part of him. Thus, the auditory assault is not merely an external menace. It is a call to face the tumult inside, a confrontation between the fading echoes of his past and the present chaos that refuses to abate. The darkness around John thickens as the disembodied voices continue their relentless murmur. Each echo, though seemingly ephemeral, carries an undeniable symbolic weight, serving as a living metaphor for the guilt and grief he has long tried to bury. In these hushed intonations, every murmur hints at unresolved burdens. It is as if the voices themselves confess mistakes made in moments of weakness and remind him of losses he has never fully acknowledged. The sound of each whisper is charged with the quiet agony of memories left unhealed, symbolizing the duality of human vulnerability and the ever-present tension between hidden sorrow and the need to persevere. As John listens, the chorus of murmurs begins to weave itself into a narrative that mirrors his inner life. The voices do more than simply intrude upon his senses. They act as spectral emissaries from a part of himself that has been suppressed for so long. Their low, overlapping cadences suggest that what he once dismissed as mere anxiety might in fact be the audible trace of suppressed grief and unspoken regret. In every fading syllable, there is an echo of his past, an unresolved chapter where guilt and remorse once reigned unchallenged. This auditory reminder forces him to confront the truths he has long avoided, revealing how deeply entwined his identity is with the unseen pain that now clamors for recognition. Between the words and the silences, John finds himself trapped in a liminal space where the boundaries between external terror and internal anguish begin to blur. The voices swell and recede like tidal waves, leaving him to ponder whether they are manifestations of an oppressive, malignant realm or the raw, disjointed expressions of his own fractured psyche. Their origin becomes less important than the message they deliver. Every hushed phrase is a mirror reflecting a facet of his inner turmoil. In this interplay of sound and meaning, the whispers evoke the dual nature of existence, where darkness and light coexist, and where every moment of despair is counterbalanced by the possibility of understanding and redemption. Over time, the relentless cadence of these murmurs evolves into a symbolic tapestry of emotions, each fragment of sound a silent testament to the complexity of human nature. The voices speak in riddles that challenge John's perception of what is real, encouraging him to question the reliability of his own memories and his sense of self. As he struggles to parse whether these intonations are the lingering residue of the artifact's influence or the raw, unwelcome outpouring of his innermost fears, he is forced to reckon with the very foundations upon which his identity has been built. The voices, simultaneously external and deeply internal, serve as a potent reminder that truth is rarely clear-cut, and that the most formidable barriers often reside within the mind itself. In this murky confluence of sound and sensation, every whisper becomes a metaphor for the fractures in his life, a persistent echo of the vulnerability that defines him, a challenge to reconcile the chaos of his inner world with the semblance of order he once knew. The symbolic weight of these murmurs, laden with guilt and sorrow, transforms into an unsettling guide through the murk of his reality, compelling him to acknowledge that the deepest truths about his existence may lie hidden within the very darkness that now surrounds him. John's ears convulse with the relentless cascade of murmurs, a tide of half-heard syllables that transforms from a soft undercurrent into a crashing wave, threatening to overwhelm his dwindling grasp of reality. With every passing moment, the whispers compound, each utterance laden with secrets that pry open hidden fissures in his mind. The overlapping voices, at first subtle and tentative, now grow in urgency, each layer of sound a reminder of broken memories and the quiet sorrows of a life he once knew. It is as if the very air around him vibrates with a dark energy, each tremor an invitation to surrender to the overwhelming chorus of despair. The effect is both profound and insidious. Initially, the disembodied murmurs teased his consciousness gently, as if they were nothing more than an echo of distant grief, but gradually they adapt a more sinister cadence. The cumulative force of these spectral utterances chips away at the walls of John's sanity. What began as an almost tolerable background noise soon escalates into a relentless barrage that invades every thought. Each new fragment of sound slithers into his awareness, honing his fears and dredging up images of long-suppressed regrets. Here, in this moment, the distinction between external threat and internal tumult dissolves, leaving him suspended in a realm where every whispered word casts doubt on his once firm reality. As the whispers intensify, they tighten like invisible hands around his chest, striking unbidden chords of recollection that he had long tried to bury. Every murmur is a summoning of past failures, echoing the weight of despair that has haunted him for years. The sound is no longer merely heard. It is felt, a pervasive force that saturates his entire being with the terror of what might lie just beyond the threshold of consciousness. With each passing second, John senses his inner resolve eroding, as if each new revelation is a calculated onset of madness. The steady cadence of these voices transforms into a resonant, almost orchestral crescendo, a symphony of sorrow that both terrifies and mesmerizes him. At this shattering juncture, the cumulative pressure becomes too potent to dismiss as mere illusion. The perpetual assault of the echoes forces John to confront the stark possibility that these voices are not simply the distorted remnants of his fading reason, but a deliberate, inexorable call towards an unfathomable darkness. With his heart pounding in defiance of his weakening mind, he stands at a crossroads where the only apparent exit is to yield to the engulfing void. Every whisper now seems to pull at the tether of sanity that once anchored him to an orderly world, presenting him with an agonizing choice: continue to cling desperately to fading light or succumb entirely to the suffocating embrace of shadow. In this critical moment, a juncture defined by the convergence of every half-heard secret and every lingering regret, the relentless dirge of voices leaves him teetering on the brink, his consciousness fraying at the edges. The barrage, now a maelstrom of sound and sensation, signals an inevitable transformation. John is forced to face the arduous truth that his struggle is no longer simply against an external force, but a battle against the very fabric of his recollection and identity, as the echoes blur the line between what was once known and what now calls him to the abyss. Labyrinth of shadows. Trapped within a swirling maze formed from his deepest anxieties, John fights to find a way out before it consumes him. John's heart pounded as the familiar world around him dissolved into a disorienting expanse of twisting corridors and shifting walls. In the blink of an eye, the space he knew melted into a living labyrinth, a physical manifestation of the fears and doubts festering deep within him. The walls, no longer static and cold, now throbbed with an uncanny life, as if exhaling slow, measured breaths. Their surfaces rippled and shimmered in the faint light, each undulation echoing a hidden anxiety. Every step revealed a maze that wasn't built by man but instead crafted by the tremors of his inner turmoil. At first, John could scarcely believe his eyes. He had been walking a straight, unremarkable path moments before when the environment began to contort. Corridors that had once led to certainty now twisted and fractured, their geometry defying logic. The passageways formed at random. Some stretched into long, narrow avenues that disappeared into impenetrable darkness, while others opened unexpectedly into claustrophobic alcoves that seemed to constrict around him. The transformation was not merely physical, but profoundly psychological. Every shifting passage reminded him that he was now navigating a maze forged of his personal dread, each corner harboring the specter of repressed memories and unspoken fears. The air was heavy with an oppressive silence broken only by distant, echoing sounds. A low hum, the soft rustle of unseen movement, and the subtle murmur of whispers. These sounds were not random. They carried an almost mocking cadence, as though the maze itself was laughing at his vulnerability. The gentle susurration of these echoes intertwined with the rhythmic creaks and groans of the twisting structure, creating an atmosphere thick with foreboding. Shadows flickered at the periphery of his vision, merging with the present to conjure fleeting images of long-forgotten sorrows, each one a silent warning of danger that lay both without and within. The sensation of the walls was equally disconcerting. They seemed to breathe, as if the maze had a pulse that beat in tandem with his racing heart, while their surfaces shifted from smooth to rough in the span of a heartbeat. At times, the corridors would vanish before he could fully register them, leaving behind a void that threatened to swallow even the smallest glimmer of hope. The very ground underfoot shifted subtly, adding to his disorientation and evoking memories of moments when his stability, both physical and emotional, had been in danger of collapsing. It was in this shifting, mercurial maze that John was forced to confront the magnitude of his inner conflicts. Every breath, every lagging heartbeat, and every subtle movement of the maze around him collectively transformed the space into a living mirror of his internal state, fragile, unpredictable, and laden with the heavy residue of long-suppressed fears. Amid this swirling chaos, the interplay of light and shadow, sound and silence, began to reveal subtle patterns, hints that somehow, inexplicably, there might be a way to navigate the maze and reclaim a fragment of control over his unraveling reality. John felt an unmistakable shiver as reality warped into a twisting maze, a manifestation of intense inner turmoil. Every winding corridor and sudden dead end was more than a random distortion of space. It was a symbolic representation of repressed memories and unresolved fears. The labyrinth's walls, slick and ever-changing, carried the weight of unspoken regrets, each curvature and hidden alcove a mirror reflecting moments of past anguish that John had long tried to bury. In these shifting passages, every obstacle was a tangible echo of an old failure or a forgotten sorrow, silently demanding recognition. At one moment, a straight path gave way to an abrupt, suffocating closure, an inescapable barrier that gnawed at his sense of progress. Then, just as quickly, a pathway would loop unexpectedly, guiding him in a circle toward the very heart of his buried guilt. Each twisting turn challenged him to confront the fragments of his identity he had so desperately avoided. It was as if the maze itself was alive with the duty of testing his resolve, deliberately arranging its deceptive pathways to force him into a confrontation with the darkest segments of his past. In this space, the recurring loops were not random. They were a relentless reminder of the cyclical nature of his inner demons. While navigating the narrow, shifting corridors, John's mind began to question the very nature of what he was experiencing. Was the labyrinth a real, external prison built by sinister forces beyond him? Or was it the arena of his own psyche, an elaborate, self-forged confrontation with his innermost fears and regrets. As each step led him deeper into the maze, the boundaries between physical environment and personal memory blurred, leaving him to ponder if the true battleground was within his own soul. In moments of forced stillness, when the oppressive silence pressed in on him like a weight, those questions grew louder, and the line between illusion and reality became increasingly indistinct. Every deceptive twist served as a lesson: the unyielding nature of avoided pain and the inevitability of confronting one's inner darkness. At times, the maze's layout shifted suddenly. Corridors split into multiple paths that fizzled into dead ends or twisted back upon themselves in maddening repetition, each transformation a vivid metaphor for the persistent recurrence of long-held traumas. In these moments, John realized that his escape would not be achieved merely by outpacing the maze's physical deceptions, but by facing and understanding the emotional barriers they represented. The labyrinth urged him to decipher the coded lessons hidden within its convoluted routes, transforming each misstep into an opportunity for self-reflection. In this bewildering dance between external structure and internal sentiment, every obstacle became an invitation to probe deeper into the scars of his past. With each hesitant step and every forced pause to gather his thoughts, John learned that the labyrinth was not simply a prison to be escaped. It was a mirror, challenging him to reconstruct the very foundation of his identity. Amid the oppressive shadows and deceptive corridors, he began to see that true liberation lay not in fleeing the maze, but in comprehending and embracing the tormented echoes of his own soul. John's footsteps falter as he advances deeper into the twisting corridors, where the very walls seem to bear witness to his hidden turmoil. In this confounding stretch of the maze, every surface is etched with eerie inscriptions that glow with a faint, otherworldly luminescence. The symbols, carved in an ancient, almost forgotten script, pulse softly as if they were alive, each stroke hinting at memories of betrayal, loss, and regrets that John had long attempted to bury. It is as if the maze itself has become a scribe of his inner confessions, forcing him to recognize the parts of his past he'd rather ignore. Amid the disorientation, phantom figures begin to materialize along the narrow, winding passages. These shifting silhouettes, barely discernible in the wavering light, carry the semblance of faces from his own history. A fleeting glimpse of a familiar smile, the sorrowful gaze of a lost friend, or the accusing stare of a figure from a regretful chapter of his life. They dart away whenever he tries to focus on them, leaving only the echo of his own voice bouncing back, layered with doubt and unspoken truths. The spectral sounds seem designed to unsettle him, as if mocking his feeble attempts to escape the relentless parade of his past. At another deceptive turn, the labyrinth challenges him with puzzles inscribed upon the crumbling stone. Here, the walls fracture into intricate, almost maddening mosaics of twisted symbols and cryptic letters that seem to rearrange themselves at every glance. John is compelled to pause, not merely to navigate the physical space, but to decode the messages hidden within these inscriptions. Each deciphered fragment dredges up a buried memory, small moments of failure, lapses in judgment, and the pervasive weight of self-doubt. These engraved riddles serve as a constant reminder that every step forward is inextricably linked to the darkness that has long festered in the recesses of his mind. The passage narrows abruptly, the corridor's ceiling coming perilously low, forcing him into a cramped squeeze where the pressure is nearly tangible. In that stifling space, every shallow breath amplifies the sensation of confinement. A sudden drop, a narrow, jagged chasm hidden in the floor, jeopardizes his balance. The fear of falling becomes a physical manifestation of the risk of succumbing to his inner demons. With the specters of his unresolved anguish lurking at every turn, John finds that the labyrinth demands not just physical agility, but an emotional reckoning with every falter. The maze, in its ceaseless cruelty, reveals that the obstacles are more than mere barriers. They are deliberate confrontations with what he has long denied. They force him to face the undeniable truth that these symbolic impediments are pieces of himself, laid bare upon cold stone. In each chiseled inscription, every phantom shape, and within the uncertain pull of deceptive paths, John is taught that true escape is contingent on confronting these internal specters head-on. Only by deciphering the messages of his past and accepting their persistent presence can he hope to transform the very obstacles that ensnare him into stepping stones toward liberation. John's pulse hammered in his ears as he advanced deeper into the twisting corridors, each step a reminder of how the maze itself seemed to conspire against him. The walls, slick with a cold, unnatural dampness, crept inward, and every misstep tightened their grip as if mocking his desperate attempts to escape. A low, omnipresent hum filled the narrow passageways, a sound that merged with the erratic pounding of his heart, amplifying the oppressive solitude that swallowed every echo of his cautious footfall. The relentless pressure in his chest grew heavier with every turn. He felt as though invisible hands pressed down upon him, forcing shallow, frantic breaths that barely quenched the rising panic. In the moment between one wrong turn and the soundless void that followed, an internal monologue emerged. Why does every corridor lead me deeper into this self-made prison? The question reverberated through his mind, mingling with the distant drip of moisture from overhead and the soft, dissonant whispers that seemed to beckon him further into despair. As John rounded a corner and found himself at a dead end, the labyrinth's deceit became brutally clear. The path he had believed to be progress was nothing more than another trap, another fragment of his own buried memories, a painful reminder of regrets long suppressed. The oppressive silence stretched on, punctuated only by the frantic echo of his heartbeat. In that moment, the air grew so thick he could almost taste the despair coiled tightly within it. His thoughts turned inward as he wrestled with the realization that the maze was not only a physical entrapment but also a manifestation of his deepest anxieties and unspoken traumas. Every nerve was ablaze with tension as he paused, forced into stillness by the relentless pressure. The labyrinth's corridors seemed to murmur secrets only he could understand, a litany of his own failures and the shadow of past mistakes. He wondered if the maze were a living record of everything he'd tried so desperately to forget, now rising to challenge him with every narrowing passage and deceptive twist. The sensation was akin to drowning slowly in a sea of memories, where each wave of panic threatened to overwhelm his fragile resolve. In that critical pause, when time itself felt suspended by the weight of fear, John allowed himself to truly listen to the ragged beat of his heart, the rapid cadence of his breath, and the unyielding silence that followed each echo in the void. The realization struck him with a quiet intensity. Before light could pierce the darkness surrounding him, he needed to confront the depths of his own terror. He opened himself to the raw truth that every barrier in the maze was as much about the external maze as it was about the internal landscapes he had long avoided. And so, amidst the suffocating enclosure and the mounting pressure of his faltering composure, John found a fragile pivot point, a tentative spark of clarity. It was the beginning of his reckoning, the moment when the swirling despair gradually yielded to a resolute determination to unravel the symbolism of each dead end, each deceptive turn. In that suspended heartbeat of terror, he resolved to search for meaning amid chaos, preparing himself for the arduous journey ahead to reclaim both his physical freedom and the remnants of a once unbroken self. John's pulse steadied as he noticed a subtle, almost imperceptible repetition etched into the damp stone wall, a series of faint patterns that seemed to pulse in time with his racing heartbeat. In the midst of the twisting corridors, where shadows danced in unpredictable rhythms, these markings shone like beacons in a chaotic sea. The walls, alive with a slow, rhythmic surge, now revealed hints of a hidden structure. Lines and curves, once dismissed as random aberrations of the labyrinth, began to align in a deliberate, orderly cadence. It was as if the maze itself was whispering directions amidst the tumult, urging him to look beyond the apparent pandemonium. With every cautious step, John let his eyes absorb the intricacies of the ever-shifting passageways. He noted how the once overwhelming maze now seemed to follow a concealed logic, a secret language formed by deliberate scratches, arching fissures, and clusters of recurring textures. The oppressive mist that had blinded him moments earlier gradually dispersed around these patterns, highlighting subtle directional cues that hinted at a possible escape. His mind, calmed by the realization that chaos could harbor order, began to decipher the cryptic arrangement before him like a treasure map, one where every irregularity was a signpost pointing to a hidden exit. Drawing nearer to a narrow alcove where the air itself seemed charged with quiet intensity, John encountered a section of the maze that stood apart. Here, the shifting walls bore inscriptions and symbols reminiscent of haunting images from memories long buried. The carvings evoked the raw terror of childhood nightmares, silhouettes of despair and faceless phantoms, but they now also served as a mirror reflecting his inner turmoil. In that confined space, the labyrinth confronted him head-on, challenging him to acknowledge the old wounds and persistent insecurities that had followed him all his life. Each etched character was not merely an expression of fear but also a deliberate marker, a guide meant to lead him out of this sealed prison of his own making. Summoning every ounce of newfound resolve, he carefully retraced these symbols with his eyes and hands alike, piecing together the hidden message they conveyed. The once insurmountable barrier of dread began to transform before him into a tangible gateway, a passage born of raw, personal confrontation. Every careful observation and measured step worked in concert, driving away panic and replacing it with the clarity of purpose. In precisely that moment, as the architectural maze yielded to his meticulous scrutiny, John experienced a breakthrough, an awakening to a pattern of escape interwoven with his own journey of self-discovery. With a cautious exhale, he pressed forward into the narrowing corridor where light dared to breach the darkness. The symbolic wall, once a monument to his most profound fears, cracked under the weight of his determined resolve. In that shuddering instant, as the oppressive gloom receded to reveal a sliver of promise, he sensed that the route to liberation was finally within grasp. Each step beyond this barrier was a step closer to reclaiming not only his physical freedom but also the inner peace long lost in the maze of his subconscious struggles. The weight of despair. In this land of constant gloom, John learns about the burdens carried by others who have fallen victim to despair. The land before him was a vast expanse of desolation, where even the light seemed burdened with sorrow. As John moved forward, every step was met with an oppressive heaviness, a reminder that despair here was not simply felt in the heart, but was woven into the very fabric of the environment. The sky above was a gloomy tapestry of ashen blues and murky grays, the fading light barely piercing a perpetual curtain of low-hanging clouds. It was as if the heavens themselves were mourning a long-forgotten loss, and their grief seeped down to saturate the air. The ground, littered with fragments of what once held meaning or hope, resonated with memories of unspoken anguish. With each footfall, the earth seemed to whisper stories of sorrow. It was a mute, unyielding witness to the lives that had been swallowed by this ceaseless gloom. Around him, the remnants of shattered souls lay scattered, faded inscriptions on weathered stone, tattered relics that had lost their brilliance, and hollow spaces where echoes of past laughter had long been replaced by silence. In every detail there was a lesson. Despair was not transient but a force that, once invoked, changed the very nature of existence. The oppressive atmosphere was tangible, as if one could feel its weight on the skin, a relentless pressure that made each breath a labor. The moisture in the air, laden with the taste of salt and regret, clung to him like an unwanted second skin. It was a constant reminder that in this place, hope had been systematically drained until only a barren melancholy remained. Even the wind carried with it murmurs of forgotten sorrow, a soft cadence that recited the memories of those who had succumbed to despair long ago. Their silent laments seemed to instruct him. Here, grief was not a private burden but a shared inheritance, a lesson forced upon every wanderer who dared to traverse this forsaken realm. Every element of this seeming wasteland contributed to an unyielding narrative of loss. The rugged outlines of abandoned structures, the feeble glow of a dying light, and the swirling eddies of dust all served as somber chapters in a tale of overwhelming despondency. The environment itself acted as a living text, openly teaching that despair was not merely an abstract state of mind. Rather, it was a palpable, corrosive force, one that could seep into the marrow of existence and render even the most vibrant memories into a muted gray. In this realm of ceaseless gloom, John's senses were both assaulted and educated. He saw firsthand how despair could be both physical and symbolic, a relentless presence that left no aspect of life untouched. The land, steeped in an atmosphere of sorrow, instructed him in the harsh truth that unchecked, despair could envelop every thought, every breath, and every moment. Standing amidst the ruin and the regret, he began to understand the weight of this pervasive gloom, a burden shared by many, but perhaps one that could yet be challenged from within. John stepped into a narrow corridor where time itself seemed reluctant to move. The very air was heavy, laden with the imprints of sorrow and defeat. As his footsteps echoed softly against decaying stone, he discovered a collection of abandoned belongings scattered carelessly on the dust-laden floor. Tattered shawls, rusted trinkets, and broken photographs whose edges whispered forgotten names. Each discarded artifact bore silent testimony to lives once full of hope, now reduced to remnants of a struggle against an unyielding, crushing despair. Closer to the far wall, faded inscriptions revealed themselves in the muted light that filtered weakly through the gloom. The walls, pitted and scarred as if bearing the marks of countless anguished confessions, were etched with cryptic symbols and barely legible words. These inscriptions were not random. They captured desperate pleas, half-forgotten laments, and the raw admissions of souls who had long surrendered to grief. The script, smudged over time by the relentless embrace of despair, spoke of deep, personal losses, a lament that echoed the universal burden of guilt and sorrow. It was as though the victims, in their final hours, sought to externalize their inner torment, leaving the scars of their pain for others to bear witness. A chill ran down John's spine as an almost imperceptible murmur seemed to drift from the very walls. It was not a sound, but a series of faint, echoing whispers, an auditory residue of voices that had once cried out in agony and longing. For a moment, the silence deepened, and these spectral echoes filled the corridor, each one a reminder of the voices that had been stifled by overwhelming grief. There was a strange beauty in their melancholy, a poignancy born not solely of hopelessness, but also of the reality of human fragility. The resonant murmurs were like a litany of lessons. They taught that despair was not a fleeting emotion, but a pervasive force that could claim both the body and the soul if left unchallenged. Every relic John encountered seemed charged with purpose, urging him to learn from the narratives of those who had come before. The abandoned belongings, the indelible marks on the walls, and even the persistent echoes of long-silenced voices coalesced into a tangible reminder of the price paid by those who allowed their inner light to be dimmed by despair. Here was evidence of the profound vulnerability inherent in the human spirit, a testament to the notion that grief, when left unchecked, could erode hope until only echoes of a once vibrant life remained. In that desolate passage, amid the remnants of shattered souls, John found himself set adrift between mourning and understanding. Each artifact, whether a fragmented piece of memory or a whispered declaration etched in stone, illuminated the bleak consequences of surrendering to despair. And as he absorbed their silent teachings, he was reminded that the frailty of being is often intertwined with a parallel opportunity for redemption, provided one can summon the strength to learn from these scattered relics before they become his own fate. The land itself seems to bleed sorrow, each crumbling edifice and every muted hue whispering the secrets of 1,000 unspoken tragedies. Wandering through corridors of dilapidated stone and time-worn walls, John notes that the decay is not random but methodically etched by the passage of relentless grief. Faded inscriptions, half erased by time and neglect, stand as solemn testaments to lives once brimming with hope, now dissolved into muted despair. Here, each broken shard of pottery and each abandoned trinket finds its echo in the shadow of an even greater internal void, a void that transcends the physical, reflecting battles fought in the deepest recesses of the human soul. In this dismal expanse, the environment appears as a living canvas painted with the anguish of those who have long succumbed to despair. John finds that every scar in the battered stone and every forlorn marking on crumbling surfaces mirrors the inner turmoil of lost souls, their pain immortalized in the very fabric of their surroundings. There's a heavy language to these symbols, a dialect of sorrow that speaks directly to the heart without uttering a single word. For instance, a once grand mural now sun-bleached and peeling off the wall hints at vibrant memories shattered under the weight of relentless melancholy. The slow erosion of color and form signals not merely the march of time but the fading vibrancy of human spirit as hope wanes. At moments spent in quiet observation, John realizes that these manifestations of decay and despair are invitational. They beckon him to look beyond the surface and reckon with the profound interconnectedness between external desolation and internal anguish. As he runs his fingers over rough-hewn stone surfaces marred by cryptic symbols of loss, he is compelled to contemplate the idea that this shared sorrow is not confined to isolated incidents but is, in fact, a universal condition. The stark emptiness etched into every physical crevice becomes a mirror to his own quietly festering regrets and unshed tears, illuminating the truth that the wounds of the heart leave marks in the world as indelible as those carved by time. This reflective dialogue between the environment and the inner self carries a lesson in understanding the duality of human grief. It is both a personal burden and a communal scar. The relentless gloom surrounding him teaches that despair, when unacknowledged, seeps outward to transform places of fleeting beauty into everlasting memorials of sorrow. Every sigh of the wind, every subtle crack in a desolate wall, becomes an echo of the silent lament carried deep within the souls of those who have walked this path before him. Even as the barren landscape seems to impose its oppressive stillness upon him, John learns that these external traces are, paradoxically, calls to awaken and confront the emotional truths that many choose to bury. In these moments of contemplation, the universality of despair is laid bare. The anguish of one is interwoven with the collective suffering of all, bound by the thread of internal sorrow immortalized by their surroundings. Such reflections, etched as firmly into the landscape as the scars of time itself, serve as enduring reminders that while personal loss may be uniquely felt, it resonates with a shared, inescapable human experience. John's steps slowed as he encountered yet another silent monument to despair. The palpable weight of gloom pressed upon him, an inescapable force that rendered each step a struggle against an environment that mirrored his inner desolation. As he wandered along a narrow path carved from anguish, a fragment of broken glass among the debris caught his eye. Its surface, marred with scratches and streaks of old tears, evoked an unbidden flashback. A private moment of harrowing loss when guilt and regret converged in a suffocating moment of weakness. That memory, sharp and unyielding, forced him to confront the truth that much of the despair now cascading around him was mirrored within his own heart. In that silent confrontation, John felt the dual weight of collective anguish and personal torment. The grim tapestry of broken lives that lay scattered before him was no stranger. It was a reflection of his own internal decay, where every shard of memory stung like a remnant of past failures. In the sporadic, melancholic whispers wafting through the desolate air, a persistent internal voice questioned him. "Do you see, John, how these shattered echoes of others' lives mirror your unspoken sorrow?" The question resonated with him, its tone both accusatory and sorrowful. In that moment, he could no longer deny that each hesitant step he took was fueled by the same quiet resignation that had subdued those who had given in before him. His mind, a battleground of regret and unhealed wounds, recalled distant moments when hope seemed a distant memory and despair, an ever-present companion. Those recollections, vivid as they were painful, wove together the collective grief of fallen souls with the unresolved sorrows of his own life. As memories of personal losses, small betrayals, missed opportunities, and loves left uncherished flooded back, John realized that his burden was not an isolated plight but part of a vast, shared human experience. The desolation he observed in the ruins was an external manifestation of a struggle he had long refused to acknowledge. Every scar etched into the cold stone, every leftover remnant in the shadowed corners, became a lesson in both empathy and self-awareness. He recognized that the sorrow of others was not an alien force pressing down upon him, but a mirror that reflected the quiet suffering he had carried within. This moment of introspection marked a turning point, the realization that embracing his own grief could be the first step toward transcending it. In accepting that his inner burden was intricately interlaced with the collective despair surrounding him, John felt a fragile yet powerful surge of empathy, a resolve to no longer let despair remain a silent, unchallenged master over his destiny. John hesitates before a wall scarred by the anguished inscriptions of those who had long succumbed to the crushing weight of gloom. Amid the pervasive silence and dilapidated artifacts, The air itself seems thick with the lament of forsaken souls. Even as the relentless despair presses in around him, John begins to perceive that every faded mark and every discarded relic is a lesson in the human struggle, a silent curriculum on the workings of sorrow and resilience. The markings on cracked stone, etched hastily by desperate hands, speak of moments when hope faltered and every day became a battle against the consuming night. In these echoes of past torment, John finds more than just a record of defeat. He uncovers subtle testimonies of endurance. The very fabric of this dismal realm, woven from shared grief and hidden regrets, begins to impart a profound truth. Despair, when confronted with honest introspection, can reveal an inner reservoir of strength. Each relic, each whispered memory, is a call to examine what true courage entails, not merely the denial of overwhelming sorrow, but the harnessing of its raw power to spur decisive change. Staring into a shattered mirror that reflects not only his sorrowful eyes, but also the ghostly remnants of others' despair, John reaches a critical point of reckoning. In that reflective surface, he sees that the cumulative burden of lost dreams and unspoken regrets is not solely a weight to be borne, but a transformative force. The seemingly immutable grief etched into every crumbling wall now offers a lesson. The persistence of despair might be inevitable, yet surrender is not. By embracing these memories as integral parts of his life's narrative, he understands that he has the opportunity, and the duty, to transmute them into the fortitude required for survival. Within the oppressive atmosphere of lingering loss, a quiet determination takes root. John begins to question the fundamental choice before him. He ponders whether to allow the omnipresent desolation to extinguish the very spark of his existence or to let the collective sorrow serve as fuel for his inner metamorphosis. It becomes clear that while the realm's tangible horrors and the intangible weight of despair threaten to overwhelm, they also compel him to confront his vulnerabilities. Embracing that vulnerability, he learns, is the first step toward reclaiming control over his destiny. This juncture is not merely a retreat into introspection but a decisive pivot toward self-empowerment. The old scars, the faded voices and the imprints of shattered souls, now guide him. They teach that every moment of desolation can be a lesson in resilience if one chooses to listen. John resolves that the despair which once seemed all-consuming might instead be repurposed as a crucible in which his resolve is tested and ultimately strengthened. In this charged quiet, he silently vows to channel the sorrow that surrounds him into the energy required to face not only the external horrors of the realm, but also the deeper chasms within himself. Thus, amid the oppressive gloom, as the cumulative weight of shared grief coalesces into a singular, defining moment, John steps forward, determined to transform the very despair that threatened to crush him into a beacon guiding his next perilous ascent. Confronting the abyss. A confrontation with a malevolent force forces John to face his personal demons head-on, a pivotal moment of reckoning. John's pulse quickened as an unseen presence seeped into every fiber of his being. In that ominous moment, the world around him began to transform. The familiar ground beneath his feet turned uncertain. A shifting, barren expanse where light receded into inky voids and every corner birthed deeper, lingering shadows. The chill of the encroaching dark seemed to whisper promises of forgotten hauntings, drawing John into a confrontation with forces that lurked just beyond the edge of his awareness. In the distance, a low, almost imperceptible hum resonated through the air, a sound that ebbed and flowed like a heartbeat in the silence. The oppressive atmosphere, laden with damp mist and echoing sighs, mirrored the turmoil churning within him. It was as if the environment itself had become an extension of his inner despair, illustrating his mounting trepidation through every jagged line of uneven terrain and every spectral flicker of light. The foreboding landscape was not merely background. It was a living, breathing entity that anticipated the clash between his divided self and the darkness that had long slumbered beneath his conscious mind. As John inched forward, each step drawing him closer to that unspoken threat, memories long suppressed began to stir. Faint recollections surfaced, whispered images of past missteps and unhealed wounds, casting eerie shadows that danced across the landscape. The low murmur of winds seemed almost to echo names and regrets, confounding his sense of time and place. In this liminal space, the boundary between the natural world and the realm of his own emotional scars blurred. The oppressive hush was punctuated by fleeting, disjointed images. A forgotten promise, a misbegotten choice, a heart left bruised by the relentless hand of fate. The tension was palpable, hanging in the heavy air like a fragile shroud. John's mind raced to make sense of the sensory overload, the distorted reflections of guilt and grief woven into every rustle of the dying wind. He noticed how the oppressive shadows around him shifted, contorting into sinister silhouettes that mirrored the darkest corners of his soul. Every heartbeat seemed to reverberate with the collective weight of all his unspoken regrets, as if each moment of internal conflict was being laid bare against the vast, unseen tapestry of the night. There was a peculiar inevitability to the moment, as though the environment had been meticulously orchestrated to lead him here, to the brink of a confrontation that was as much about rediscovering himself as it was about facing an external menace. The palpable dread of that approaching presence intertwined with John's internal catharsis, setting the stage for an encounter with not just a spectral force, but with the very essence of his personal failings and hidden sorrows. Every tremor in the ground, every distorted echo in the distance, reinforced the notion that he was on the verge of an inevitable collision, a reckoning with the parts of himself he had long evaded. In that silent, suspended moment, the world held its breath. The darkness around him deepened, preparing for the clash between light and shadow, a battle that was destined to reveal truths too raw to ignore. Before John's eyes, a presence began to materialize, a shifting, spectral entity whose very essence seemed to be woven from the fabric of repressed terror and long-forgotten regrets. Its form was not fixed but rather an ever-changing tapestry of shadows, fluid and impossible to pin down, as if it existed between worlds. In the dim light of the desolate landscape, the entity's outline appeared like a rippling veil of darkness. One moment, its edges were soft and indistinct, and the next, they sharpened into jagged contours reminiscent of fractured glass. Every movement of this spectral force seemed deliberate, each subtle undulation echoing fragments of John's buried memories. The creature's skin was less substance than it was a haunting translucence, a shifting haze of smoky grays and void-like blacks that absorbed rather than reflected light. At intervals, from within that amorphous mass, glints of an otherworldly radiance flickered, as if fragments of tormented souls were trapped within its being. There was a quiet, insidious energy that emanated from it, a pulsating aura that filled the space with an unsettling chill, as though the very air had been tainted by sorrow and despair. Its form was disturbingly ambiguous, a visage with no fixed features, yet for all its ambiguity, it communicated with unsettling clarity. In one fleeting moment, a semblance of eyes appeared, hollow and accusing. In the next, the contours shifted to reveal a more abstract, almost mask-like countenance that bore the scars of unspoken anxieties. There was a bizarre beauty in this aberration, a grotesque elegance that seemed to personify every hidden guilt and unacknowledged wound John had ever tried to forget. With every slow, deliberate shift, the being drew forth whispers from the void, a language older than memory, filled with the echoes of personal failures and the weight of sorrow. The atmosphere itself reacted to the presence of this dark force. The surrounding darkness became tangible, thickening around John as the entity advanced, its very being a palpable manifestation of the abyss within him. It was not merely an external adversary to be fought or evaded. It was an embodiment of the inner torment that had haunted him throughout his life. Every time its form reformed, so too did long-suppressed images and feelings resurface, each new contour a reflection of moments when fear, regret, and despair had once dominated his thoughts. The creature's eerie motions seemed to mock the very notion of escape, insinuating that the true terror lay in facing the most intimate aspects of one's own dark history. There was a hypnotic quality in the way the spectral figure distorted reality around it, a slow, mesmerizing interplay between light and shadow that defied the ordinary rules of nature. It moved with a predatory grace, and in its wake, the air felt heavier, laden with the silent testimony of every unresolved sorrow. More than a mere monster prowling the edges of night, this being was a mirror to John's soul, blurring the boundaries between the external world of horror and the internal landscape of his deepest fears. In that moment, confronting it was not solely a battle for survival in a dreadful realm, but a profound, unflinching reckoning with the dark heart of his own existence. John's heart pounded as the chilling quiet was shattered by the unmistakable sound of his own ragged breathing. The ground beneath him, a barren stretch mottled with shifting shadows and uneasy glows, set the stage for a confrontation that tore at the very fabric of his being. Before him, a spectral form began to materialize, a creature woven from the dark tapestry of his unspoken fears and repressed memories. Its outline was indistinct, a shifting mass of inky darkness that seemed to pulse with a life all its own, mirroring the turmoil within him. As the figure drew nearer, every detail of its form became a disturbing echo of John's innermost vulnerabilities. Each ripple in its surface hinted at long-buried regrets and whispered accusations of failures past. There was no clear line between the physical threat and the tempest of his internal doubt. The assault was twofold, an onslaught aimed equally at his body and his psyche. The air around him grew brutally cold, as if the presence itself drained warmth and hope, while disembodied, mocking whispers slithered through the gloom, a chorus of sound that merged with the racing beat of his thoughts. In that charged moment, John felt the duality of the confrontation forcing him into a heart-wrenching dilemma: to defend his flesh from the creature's tangible, spectral strikes and to ward off the corrosive self-doubt that the apparition stirred within him. Every attack from the entity was met with a simultaneous reverberation in his mind, a visceral reminder of the scars he had long attempted to hide. With each movement, the creature's elongated, ghostly appendages traced shapes in the air that blurred with his deepest self-reproach, transforming the physical encounter into a mirror for the anguish that had accumulated over years. The sensory barrage was relentless. The air vibrated with tense, echoing taunts, while the ground's frigid touch sent shivers cascading up his arms. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, warping and twisting into grim parodies of his own face, a reminder that the enemy was not solely an external menace but an embodiment of his internal dissonance. Lightning flashes of insight collided with overwhelming despair as memories of past missteps and moments of vulnerability surged unbidden into his consciousness. Each recalled regret and every hidden sorrow were as palpable as the spectral blows that threatened to overtake him. Yet amidst the onslaught, John found a fragile spark of resolve. In one desperate, crystalline moment, he recognized that his struggle was not merely with this monstrous force but a war waged against an inner abyss that had long sought dominion over him. Summoning a clarity born from raw pain, his racing thoughts transformed into a steady, defiant cadence. In that split second, every chilling whisper and every physical strike fused into a singular call to reclaim his identity. As he met the creature's gaze, a gaze that reflected the darkest echoes of his own soul, John understood that to endure, he must embrace the totality of his self, scars and all, and refuse to surrender to the overwhelming darkness. The oppressive presence of the spectral force sent ripples through John's mind, drawing him into a relentless tide of memories he had long fought to keep buried. In the suffocating silence of that cursed space, fragments of his past began to coalesce into vivid scenes, each one a mirror reflecting his own haunted soul. The entity's whisper, soft yet menacing, conjured an unsettling montage. A childhood steeped in fragile hope collapsing under the weight of betrayal, moments when love was sacrificed on the altar of neglect, and decisions that had carved deep, indelible wounds into his very being. One vision emerged with a brutal clarity, a recollection of a bitter night when harsh words, laced with anger and regret, had shattered a once trusting bond. John could almost feel the chill of that long-ago evening, the piercing silence that followed the exchange, and the crushing loneliness that had seeped into every fiber of his being. The force, with an uncanny mimicry of that long-dimmed conversation, projected not only the voices of the past but also the unspoken remorse lodged deep in his heart. It was as if every whispered word from that spectral presence pressed John to confront the echo of that fractured relationship, demanding that he acknowledge the intensity of his guilt. At the same time, another memory surfaced, a recollection of a pivotal moment when he had chosen self-preservation over compassion. In that grim flash, the face of someone he had abandoned for his own comfort emerged, etched with betrayal and sorrow. The ghostly entity seamlessly shifted its form to mirror that hurt, its silent communication a tormenting blend of accusatory stares and the resonance of a long-forgotten appeal. Every unvoiced apology and every suppressed regret rebounded against him like a breaking wave, forcing him to question how he had allowed such wounds to fester into permanent scars. Yet the confrontation was never solely about reliving past transgressions. It was an intricate interplay between the vivid, unyielding echoes of regret and the necessity of facing them. The force seemed to know the precise moments that had defined John's failures. Every lapse in judgment, every cruel indifference that had led to irrevocable loss. It taunted him quietly with its shifting visage, a mute testimony to the burdens he had carried. In its undulating form, there lay the combined anguish of unforgiven mistakes and the lingering terror of not being able to reconcile with the self he had become. Within this maelstrom of flashbacks, John felt the undeniable pull of introspection. The images were no longer mere phantoms of memory. They were active demands for reckoning. The weight of every regret, each unsaid apology and every moment of cowardice, pressed upon him until he could no longer deny their presence. And in that crucible of painful remembrance, a fragile determination began to kindle. The spectral force, though a harbinger of dread, also unmasked the possibility of redemption, if only he had the courage to face the unyielding truth of his own heart. Each recalled failure, each outline of remorse, became a lesson etched in the darkness, urging him to step beyond the confines of persistent guilt and forge a path toward eventual absolution. John's pulse hammers against his neck as he stands before the gathering storm of shadows, a swirling mass of darkness that mirrors every unspoken regret and painful memory etched within him. In the charged silence of this dreadful arena, the landscape itself seems to recede into a void of shifting forms, as though nature had surrendered to the overwhelming gravity of his inner turmoil. Every breath is a struggle between fear and the faint, defiant spark of hope that whispers of redemption. The air vibrates with a tension so sharp it nearly cuts through the stillness, setting the stage for an inevitable reckoning. Before him, the malevolent force takes shape in a disconcerting dance of distorted forms, a phantom presence that seems to embody every dark secret he has long tried to bury. Its undulating form, at times almost human in its familiarity and at others grotesquely alien, radiates an energy as chilling as it is magnetic. It is an external incarnation of his insecurities, the lingering guilt of past failures, the ache of lost chances, the dread of a future marred by self-reproach. The creature's silent advance forces him into an acute awareness that this battle is not solely for his physical survival but for the reclamation of his own identity, long fragmented by years of self-doubt. In that excruciating moment, as memories cascade like shards of broken glass through his mind, John stands at the fork of surrender and resistance. The relentless whispers of his past, each a testimony to moments of weakness, pain, and isolation, merge with the oppressive ambience of the realm, amplifying his inner discord. Every instinct tells him that to yield is to embrace the void entirely, a final capitulation to despair. But as the specter looms ever closer, a quiet clarity begins to form amidst the chaos, a realization that confronting these haunting fragments is the only way forward. With a trembling yet resolute determination, John lifts his gaze to meet the void. In that charged silence, his resolve crystallizes into a singular, transformative act, a choice forged out of the painful acknowledgement of his own vulnerabilities. Whether through an unspoken admission of his hidden truths, or simply the act of standing defiantly as the darkness presses in, this moment marks the cusp of his inner metamorphosis. The very act of refusal, a visceral decision to confront rather than submit, courses through him like an electric jolt, shattering the brittle walls that had long contained his fears. The malevolent force recoils in a momentary, almost palpable hesitation, its form rippling like disturbed water as if not expecting such resistance. Yet, even as it seems to recede into the murkiness of the abyss, the encounter leaves an indelible mark upon John. The scars, etched by both the pain of his past and the raw intensity of his defiant stand, serve as a somber reminder that while this battle may have momentarily subdued the darkness, the journey ahead remains fraught with uncertainty. The ambiguous aftermath of this pivotal confrontation blurs the line between triumph and further descent, leaving John suspended in a fragile balance where the promise of redemption and the threat of oblivion are inextricably intertwined. The fraying threads of reality. As time dilates and reality distorts, John must discern what is real from what is imagined in his fractured state. John's world began to unravel before his eyes, a once familiar environment now rendered unrecognizable through a slow, imperceptible decay of order. The street he had walked for years transformed into a shifting panorama of blurred outlines and dissolving landmarks. Every building, every lamppost, seemed caught in a restless flux, with angles that morphed in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. The rigid edges of concrete rounded off into soft curves, as if the laws of physics were yielding to a more fluid, mysterious force. Pavement cracks widened and meandered into surreal patterns, marking the gradual erosion of stability, while shadows stretched and contracted with an eerie, elastic rhythm. Beneath a sky that wore a restless guise, time itself appeared to dilate into languid moments. Seconds extended into unmoored minutes, each tick of his internal clock punctuating a universe in crisis. The familiar cadence of everyday sounds warped into distant, ghostly echoes. A car horn, once sharp and precise, now reverberated like a far-off memory. The rustle of leaves, the murmur of passing conversations. All these sounds were drawn out and distorted, as if the atmosphere had assumed a mind of its own, manipulating every sensory cue in defiance of natural law. The transformation was not confined to the audible or the visual. It seeped into the very texture of reality. The surface of what should have been solid and unyielding now throbbed with a strange, gelatinous quality. Walls that had sturdily withstood time seemed to ripple under the pressure of this unseen force, their once firm structures softening into mutable forms that threatened to collapse at the slightest indeterminacy. John's fingertips brushed against surfaces that defied expectation. A smooth, cool facade giving way to an inexplicable, almost liquid viscosity that left him uncertain of the world's permanence. A palpable chill pervaded the transformed landscape. The air itself carried a weight, a quiet urgency that whispered of impending chaos. Colors bled together without clear boundaries. The clear blue of a window pane merged with the somber grays of distant ruins, creating a dissonant presentation where nothing was as it once seemed. Each hue and shadow intermingled chaotically, reflecting the gradual confluence of parallel realities. It was as though every matter, every physical structure, vibrated on a thin line between its present form and an ambiguous, latent possibility, a testament to the fragility of order and the relentlessness of entropy. Amid this sensory upheaval, an unsettling truth took root in John's mind. The familiar was forsaken in favor of a distortion that offered neither comfort nor clarity. Every step he took through this warped environment reinforced a single, formidable lesson. The apparent stability of existence was nothing more than a veneer, destined to rip away when exposed to forces beyond comprehension. The very ground beneath him seemed to question its own nature, as if the laws that once governed physics and perception had been unstitched by a delicate, relentless hand. In these moments of profound disorientation, the disintegration of order was not merely a physical phenomenon. It was a visceral reminder that reality, in its most absolute form, was ephemeral. Each trembling nuance in the environment served as both an omen and a lesson, urging him to confront the simple, daunting truth that nothing remains fixed when the balance of existence is disturbed. John's senses were besieged by a maelstrom of distorted impressions as he advanced into a space that adamantly defied the conventions of normalcy. Hues that once held precise definitions now bled into one another. A vivid scarlet dissolving into murky indigo, with flashes of emerald interspersed amid deep, uncertain grays. The visual world unfolded like a living canvas where boundaries blurred and colors shifted with a mercurial quality. In this surreal interplay of light and hue, the familiar transformed into a phantasmagoria, demanding that he continuously revalidate what his eyes reported. Beyond the riot of colors lay a spatial disarray that unsettled every instinct of his perception. The ground undulated beneath his feet as if he were traversing a restless sea, where distances expanded and contracted unpredictably. Walls and corridors warped into ambiguous shapes, angles once defined by logic now twisted into curves and spirals, leaving John to question the very structure of his surroundings. Each step was an exercise in uncertainty, where the floor's deceptive give and the unpredictable geometry of the space conspired to erode his confidence in familiar spatial cues. This disorientation was intensified by the paradoxical interplay between his tactile encounters and visual inputs. Reaching out to grasp what he assumed was a solid wall, John instead encountered a surface that was at once cold and fluid, both yielding and unyielding under his touch. The texture was a confusing amalgam, rough in one moment, then impossibly smooth the next, leaving him to wonder if the reality he was feeling was a flawed mirror of the image he saw. Every contact, every brush of his hand against a surface, deepened the schism between what he expected and what was perceptibly there, planting seeds of doubt within the core of his sensorial trust. Compounding the visual and tactile discrepancies were a series of auditory distortions. In an almost unnerving silence, sporadic echoes began to puncture his experience, a cacophony of sounds that seemed to emanate from every fragmented corner of the warped environment. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat intermingled with irregular beats of an elusive force, while disjointed whispers and fractured melodies permeated the space. At times, the wind carried words that felt too deliberate, almost as if the very air was speaking in riddles. These overlapping sounds formed an irregular symphony that left him struggling to separate external stimuli from the internal echoes of memory and dread. Caught in this vortex of sensory contradictions, John found himself navigating a delicate balance between certainty and doubt. His eyes, skin, and ears waged a silent debate, each channel of perception challenging the validity of the others. The overwhelming spectacle of bleeding colors, the fluid, deceptive dimensions of space, the unanticipated textures, and the erratic auditory interludes coalesced into an experience that defied conventional explanation. In that suspended moment, every perceptual input was subjected to relentless scrutiny and comparison, as if the mind itself were teaching him that reality is as fragile and mutable as the sensations it produces. This immersive conflict underscored a vital truth. In the realms of disorientation and fear, even the most dependable faculties can betray us, leaving us to question whether what we experience is a reflection of truth or merely an elaborate illusion. I find myself entangled in a relentless dialogue with my own thoughts, each one questioning the very fabric of what I perceive to be real. In this maelstrom of fleeting images and sonorous echoes, nothing appears trustworthy, not even the sensations that should bind me to a singular moment. Every touch against my skin, every stray whisper in the silence, becomes a prompt for a deeper inquiry. Is this the residue of a long-forgotten trauma, or simply the surreal manifestation of this distorted reality? There are moments when fragments of memory surge unbidden, charged with an intensity that blurs the line between then and now. The pain that once marked a chapter of my past resurfaces, raw and untempered by time, as if it were carved into the air. But I hesitate. Are these vivid recollections genuine remnants of my former life or distortions sharpened by the oppressive uncertainty that now surrounds me? The familiar shapes of lost moments and the evanescent touch of present disarray mingle seamlessly, leaving me to untangle their interwoven threads. I recall distinct flashes of a past life, each imbued with its own emotion and color, but these memories, as precious as they seem, are now shrouded in doubt. It is as though my mind has become a vast gallery where cherished recollections and unsettling images are pinned side by side, their edges blurred by the constant shifting of time and reality. The tactile sensation of an old sorrow might be triggered by a peculiar sound, yet simultaneously, that sound could be nothing more than the echo of an unreality that has seeped into my senses. In these moments of introspection, my inner voice rises above the clamor of external distortions. I ask myself, what does it mean for a memory to be real? Is its authenticity measured by the precision of its detail, or by the emotion it evokes? Each flash of painful recollection is caught in the interplay between memory and sensation, and I struggle to distinguish whether I am reliving an experience or merely witnessing the past through an altered lens. The persistent questioning unveils a paradox. If every fragment of my recollection is as volatile as the present moment, then what anchors the truth within me? I am compelled to re-examine the very concept of reality. Perhaps truth is not a static state to be discovered in the balance of present sensations and recollected pain, but a dynamic continuum shaped by the act of perceiving itself. Every sensation, be it the lingering echo of a long-buried anguish or the immediate sting of the unknown, whispers lessons about the impermanence and malleability of reality. In this profound scrutiny, I begin to suspect that the discernment of truth lies not simply in affirming the solidity of past experiences or the vividness of current encounters, but in embracing the tension between the two. So here I remain, caught between echoes and images, questioning the trustworthiness of each impulse. The struggle to delineate memory from the ephemeral now becomes not just an exercise in self-doubt, but a necessary pilgrimage toward understanding the true essence of existence. An existence defined not by the clarity of its moments, but by the insightful questioning of their intertwined nature. John felt the smooth fabric of reality fraying before his very eyes, as if the boundaries between what was known and what lurked in the void were dissolving. In the dim light of a hurried twilight, the familiar street outside his window began to betray its identity. The steady glow of a nearby lamp danced erratically on cracked walls, its light splitting into shards of vivid blues and sickly greens that shouldn't exist in the natural order of things. In that moment, the air trembled with an indefinable energy, a subtle, insidious invitation as elements from a world of dread slowly seeped into his own. At the edge of his vision, fleeting shapes materialized in the silence. A spectral figure gliding behind a half-open door, its contoured form more suggestion than substance. This apparition, bathed in a pallid, otherworldly light, carried with it a melancholy that defied explanation. As John strained to remember where he had seen that sorrowful gaze before, the figure dissolved, leaving only the echo of its presence. Then, as if to remind him of the fluidity of this encroaching realm, another vision appeared. A gaunt reflection of himself, twisted and transient, hovering in a pool of mist along the pavement. Each glance triggered a spark of recognition fused with profound unease, reinforcing the notion that the veil between realities was growing perilously thin. Every reflective surface, once a steadfast mirror of certainty, now betrayed him with bewildering distortions. In an old storefront window, his image wavered like a poorly tuned signal, an interplay of shapes that morphed between his familiar face and that of an unknown, tormented stranger. The glass seemed to capture more than his mere silhouette. It transmitted fragments of a chaotic world, overlaid with shifting colors and forms that made it impossible to decipher where his reflection ended and the invading presence began. Such occurrences left him questioning not only his own physical form but also the trustworthiness of every sensory detail he had ever relied upon. In the midst of these shifting scenes, ordinary objects took on an eerie significance. A discarded, rusted key found on the cold pavement would briefly hover before tumbling to the ground, as if stirred by an unseen, malicious force. A faint glimmer of a coin, its surface etched with unidentified symbols, caught the light and then vanished, swallowed by the surrounding fog. These items, devoid of logical origin and purpose, became emblematic of a relentless force at work, a force that refused to allow the realm of terror to be confined solely to the land of nightmares. Their presence was a tangible reminder that the dread he felt was not limited to the unseen. It had seeped into the very concrete elements around him. In these interstices where reality and terror intertwined, John's isolation deepened. Each inexplicable encounter compounded a burgeoning loneliness, a realization that the familiar world was no longer a refuge, but a canvas upon which a darker, inexplicable design was being painted. His heart pounded with the knowledge that every fleeting ghost, every distorted image, blurred the line between the objective truth of his past life and the subjective terror of his current ordeal. In that unsettling convergence, he was left to confront a reality unraveled, where the foundation of who he was crumbled beneath the weight of the unimaginable. John's surroundings have become a malleable tapestry of shifting impressions, where every familiar line and contour seems to dissolve into quivering uncertainty. The concrete solidity he once trusted now gives way to a realm in which structure and order crumble like fragile parchment before an unseen, relentless force. As the boundaries of his world fray at their edges, so too do the certainties within his mind. each dissonant echo a lesson in the precarious nature of all that was once taken for granted. In this twilight zone of perception, the environment teaches that reality is not a fixed state but an evolving fluidity. One moment, the gentle hum of existence reassures him. The next, distorted echoes and warped visions seize control of his senses, urging him to reconsider what is tangible and what is merely an echo of an older, forgotten order. Colors blend without definition. Sounds that once marked the cadence of a predictable life now evade precise location, merging into a pervasive dissonance. These sensory contradictions are not random. They are deliberate distortions that force a deeper inquiry into the essence of what it means to experience life in its raw, unfiltered form. As John navigates these perverse shifts, he finds himself immersed in an internal dialogue that is as instructive as it is unsettling. With every tremor of uncertainty, the experience imparts a crucial lesson: the impermanence of order and the inevitability of change. The invasive presence of his own fear acts like an unyielding mentor, stripping away the complacency of routine and exposing the brittle foundations upon which his former reality was built. This fear is not simply a passive emotion. It seizes the initiative, confronting him with the undeniable truth that clinging to the vestiges of a stable past may ultimately stifle his ability to embrace what his transformed existence demands. Now, at the edge of this ever-shifting unknown, John stands poised on the brink of an existential decision. The paradox is evident. While the disintegration of conventional reality might seem to signal absolute chaos, it simultaneously offers a rare opportunity to reclaim the very notion of order, albeit in a form that is no longer bound to familiar patterns. In the art of discerning between what must irrevocably be left behind and what can be reconstituted into a new framework of existence, he finds both terror and hope intertwined. Each flicker of memory, each sensation that challenges the boundaries of his formerly orderly life, invites an attentive reevaluation of what is truly essential. The cumulative effect of these revelations is that every crumbling wall and every warped reflection becomes a signpost on a path toward transformation. Far from being a moment of mere despair, the dissolution of a fixed reality urges him to identify and salvage those fragments of order that might still offer meaning, a process as delicate and deliberate as reconstructing a shattered mosaic. With his understanding of normalcy permanently fractured, John braces himself to choose which pieces to embrace and which to let fall away, thereby setting the stage for future chapters in this uncertain and evolving journey. The choice of escape. With newfound insight, John contemplates the perilous path back home versus surrendering to the dreadful world forever. John sat alone in a dim, forgotten corner of an old room, the only sound his measured breathing cutting through the heavy silence. In that moment of solitude, the cacophony of his recent experiences receded into a haunting murmur, leaving behind only his most intimate thoughts. The soft glow of a street lamp outside mingled with the flicker of memories, each one a vivid brushstroke on the canvas of his inner turmoil. He closed his eyes, allowing his mind to wander back over the tumultuous path that had brought him here. A path laid with surreal encounters and grim revelations. As he mentally retraced the steps that had shattered his former sense of normalcy, flashes of his former life surfaced. The familiar comfort of his favorite chair, the steady rhythm of everyday chores, and the warmth of ordinary human connection. Yet these recollections were abruptly intermingled with stark images of that other realm. The endless corridors where shadows dripped with foreboding, the echo of whispers from unseen mouths, and the palpable chill of an existence where logic and law unraveled into darkness. This unexpected collision of contrasting worlds stirred a potent cocktail of emotions within him. Each memory resonated with the gentle reassurance of home, yet every ghostly vision of the dreadful realm beckoned him with the lure of dangerous, forbidden knowledge. In the solitude of that moment, his thoughts took on the quality of careful instruction, as though he had become both student and mentor to his own psyche. Every recalled detail served a purpose, to illustrate the magnitude of the transformation brewing inside him, a quiet revolution of spirit and mind. He questioned the value of the safe, predictable life he once knew. Was its familiarity now merely a shallow veneer over a reality that had long lost its substance? With each flashback, John was forced to confront not only the pleasant simplicity of bygone days, but also the seductive call of a world that promised a liberation from the relentless humdrum of his past. The internal dialogue was intense and multifaceted. On one hand, rationality dictated a return to normalcy, a retreat back to a world where every smile and every sunrise was tinged with the sweet comfort of predictability. On the other hand, the mysterious, oppressive allure of the dread realm whispered promises of uncovering deeper truths, of embracing a transformation that would forever alter his conception of self. He recalled the echoing sounds of that alien world and felt the weight of the dark voices, each a reminder of unresolved fears and hidden truths. It was as if every sensory detail, every emotional memory, was orchestrated to force him into a choice between clinging to what was safe and venturing further into the profound, disquieting unknown. In this reflective isolation, John found himself meticulously weighing the scales of reason against emotion. His thoughts danced with the duality of light and shadow, as each cherished remnant of his past battled against a burgeoning desire to succumb to the realm's dangerous wisdom. The process was raw and instructional, a deliberate analysis of his innermost self that revealed both the tender vulnerabilities of his former life and the hard-edged call of a destiny permanently intertwined with the uncanny and the grotesque. Amidst this inner struggle, the gravity of his decision pressed upon him with an almost tangible force, a silent prelude to the transformation that awaited beyond the threshold of choice. John sank into the silence of his temporary refuge, his thoughts slowly unspooling like threads of a tapestry too fragile to mend. In that quiet space, he reviewed the possibility of returning to a life that he once knew as ordinary, a life now rendered ambiguous by the scars of his ordeal. Everyday routines, familiar voices, and the soft hum of mundane existence beckoned him with a promise of stability. Yet each comforting memory lay tinged with the undeniable truth that nothing could ever be exactly as it was before. He recalled his former mornings filled with the predictable rhythms of life, a simple cup of coffee, the newspaper rustling in a breeze of routine. There was a logic, a grounded normalcy in that existence. But with each recollection came another weight of uncertainty. How would he reconcile this recollected normalcy with the unsettling transformations that had taken root in his being? The attraction of returning to that known domain was accompanied by stark warnings. A world that had once been steady now appeared unstable, its familiar contours subtly distorted by an unsaid infiltration. Even the air itself might vibrate with the lingering influence of that terrible other realm, hinting at consequences no one could fully comprehend. John's rational mind catalogued these risks with the precision of a careful scholar. There was the danger that crossing back would not erase the artifact's residual mark on his psyche. Every step toward his old world might trigger dissonant echoes, a sudden, inexplicable flash of alien insight or a memory that did not belong to him. More disquieting was the possibility of rejection. Those he once knew might see only the strange reflection of a man altered by unimaginable experiences. His logical side insisted that the very act of return could start a slow, corrosive unraveling of both societal bonds and his own identity, alienating him further from the comfort he so desperately craved. In this introspection, John weighed the physical hazards as gravely as the internal ones. The passage between realms was no simple boundary. It could easily become a crucible where the immutable rules of nature dissolved into fluid chaos. A final crossing might invite a subtle yet profound distortion of reality, where the safety of the known world was intermixed with traces of the dreadful. There existed an almost scientific concern, a hypothesis, backed by the cold relative logic of his own thought, that disruption at this juncture might leave lasting scars, forever altering both the world he hoped to reclaim and the inner landscape of his mind. Thus, he found himself in a delicate balance of heart and mind. On one hand, the call of familiarity was like a beacon of order in the overwhelming chaos of his experiences. On the other, the logical fear of irrevocable damage urged him to proceed with utmost caution. Each moment of contemplation brought into focus the stark trade-off, the promise of a life once ordinary but now fraught with invisible perils, against the certainty of carrying the dreadful marks inwardly, even if the world appeared to resume its old form. In this measured evaluation, John recognized that reclaiming his previous life demanded not only a physical return but an acceptance of all that might be lost along the way. a calculated risk where every step held the potential to shatter or restore the fragile boundaries of reality. John Hargrove found himself standing at the edge of a chasm built not of stone or water but of raw, shifting despair. A rift where the familiar echoes of his past life began to dull under the relentless, hypnotic pulse of this other realm. In the distance, amid the swirling miasma of darkness and half-seen shapes, a promise whispered to him. It was an invitation not to return to the stale security of an ordinary existence, but to succumb to the realm's seductive, transformative power. This appeal, both mesmerizing and perilous, spoke in softened voices and shadowed gestures, urging him to relinquish the weight of his former identity in exchange for dangerous knowledge and an escape from his own inner torment. Every corner of the dreadful world bore its witness to secrets that defied the natural order of life. Here, the very air pulsed with ancient truths too profound for the rational mind. The realm dared him to explore its depths, offering up hints of metamorphosis so radical that embracing them promised a liberation from the ceaseless battles of his inner demons. It was less a return to innocence than a surrender to an enigmatic force that could erase the boundaries between what he was and what he might become. The more John contemplated, the more he realized that within this sinister domain lay a kind of alchemy, a way to transmute pain into unfathomable understanding, sorrow into a raw, transformative power. Yet, with such a promise came a grave cost. In embracing the realm's dark allure, every morsel of his cherished past would begin to crumble, replaced by an identity molded by nocturnal whispers and obscure cosmic horrors. The very act of surrender, while providing an escape from the torment that had plagued him for so long, would also dissolve the comforting familiarity of his old self. It was a trade-off where the currency was his soul, the steady, enduring self he had known throughout his life, exchanged for a fleeting moment of liberation that could shatter him or, paradoxically, make him whole in ways he had never dared to imagine. In the seductive gloom, a multitude of voices and visions coalesced into a single unyielding proposition: to cast aside the safe constraints of human limitation and to let the realm remake him. Each dark secret that hung in the air, each whispered truth lurking in the interplay of shadow and light, carried with it the promise of transformation. A transformation not born merely of survival, but of a rebirth rooted in the night itself. The allure was intoxicating, drawing him toward a fate where the laws of nature and the rigid constructs of identity might finally be rewritten by forces that defied mortal comprehension. Yet, as he listened to this seductive call, John wrestled with a turbulent inner dialogue. Was this sacrifice a step toward genuine liberation or merely a deeper entanglement in a labyrinth of eternal darkness? With every fiber of his being, he recognized that embracing such a fate would forever alter the person he once was. A loss that might be both irrevocable and, in its twisted way, exceedingly liberating. The choice loomed large, a silent verdict beckoning him to cross an invisible line toward a future where terror and transformation danced a perilous waltz. John sat in a silence where thought and feeling collided, a quiet space that became a battleground for every fragment of his identity. Within that stillness, his mind echoed with a dynamic internal dialogue. One voice, cool and measured, insisted on clarity and evidence, while another, raw in its vulnerability, whispered secrets of intuitive truth. Return to what you know, the rational part intoned, its words crisp with the certainty of science and order. Rebuild from familiar ground where cause meets effect, and nothing inexplicable intervenes. Yet almost immediately, a more tender yet relentless voice countered, reminding him of the allure hidden even in his darkest memories. A truth that defied simple explanation. But can you really relinquish what has taught you, even if it has scarred you? The emotion asked, trembling like the delicate play of light on a decaying wall. Each thought unfurled like a shadow in the dim light of his introspection. The rational side of him spun theories, drawing on carefully stored fragments of logic that demanded a structured, predictable reality. In its cold light, every choice could be measured, every outcome forecasted. But the emotional side, refusing to be confined by numbers and neat conclusions, painted the same space with hues of twilight, shifting, unpredictable, and hauntingly beautiful. This interplay, as if nature itself was demonstrating the balance between day and night, underscored that every decision carried consequences that transcended mere calculation. As he weighed the tangible risks of recrossing into the familiar world, John's internal dialogue grew vivid. One part of him recalled the crisp, empirical evidence that explained the phenomena he'd witnessed, a narrative that could be dissected by reason alone. But in the background, echoing like distant, ghostly whispers, was the reminder that not all experiences yield to analysis. In this silent debate, light bled into shadow, the sharp edges of scientific reasoning softened by the murmur of deep-seated emotions. The interplay of these forces was like a candle flame whose glow flickers against encroaching darkness, each tremor revealing another layer of personal history and unseen possibility. He questioned whether a life governed solely by rational principles, though safe and familiar, might forever deny him the full spectrum of what it meant to live authentically. The emotional current, primal and urgent, argued that surrendering to the profound depths of his transformative journey might lead to growth, albeit with risks and often a painful cost. With every heartbeat, his mind rehearsed the potential for irreversible change, challenging him to accept that embracing both logic and raw emotion was the only way to truly capture the complexity of his existence. In that charged moment of internal contest, John learned that teaching comes not through simple dichotomies but through the nuance of lived experience. The balance between cold, scientific scrutiny and the messy, compelling force of emotion was not simply a battle. It was the intricate art of forging an identity that acknowledged every truth, however contradictory. John stands motionless on a narrow ridge where the oppressive atmosphere seems to pulse with his every heartbeat. In that hushed moment, the tense cusp between oblivion and salvation, each breath reverberates like a whispered promise or threat. The glow of the spectral portal ahead, faint and unsettling, mirrors an inner light that still dares to hope for redemption. Meanwhile, the lingering shadows behind him, dark and unyielding, seem to murmur of secrets only the forsaken can know. As he paces slowly on the cold, uneven ground, a tremor runs up his arms, a physical echo of the inner turmoil that has defined this long journey. The air is thick with the residue of suppressed memories and new fears, and each pulse of light from the portal casts dancing patterns across his troubled face. His sight flits between the seductive embrace of the dreadful realm and the ghostly outline of a familiar world that now appears almost alien. In this charged interval, the environment itself acts as a mirror to his soul, each flicker of movement and depthless murmur underscoring the culmination of his internal descent. The weight of his decision presses upon him, a burden that transforms his very sense of time. His heart pounds in steady, relentless cadence, a counterpoint to nothingness, while his mind races through the echoes of past joys and the pangs of irreplaceable losses. He senses a tightening in his chest that is not born from fear alone, but also from the awe of knowing that his next step will irrevocably define who he is. The delicate interplay of warm, familiar recollections and the cold, seductive call of an enigmatic power forms a crucible in which his identity is being remade. At that critical moment, his senses heighten. The soft scrape of gravel underfoot, the caress of an unseen wind drawing a tear along his weathered cheek, and the whisper of his own thoughts, fearful, resolute, and tenderly melancholic. His limbs, though weighted by uncertainty, begin to inch toward the threshold. The portal's pulsing radiance contrasts starkly with the encroaching darkness behind him. Every step seems to echo an internal debate between a cautious desire for the life he once knew and the lure of a transformative destiny, regardless of the cost. Time slows as he lifts a trembling hand to the shimmering barrier. In that suspended heartbeat, the world around him appears to hold its breath. Whether it is the resolve built on rationality or raw emotion that finally propels him forward is lost in the overwhelming clarity of the moment. It is as if all the pain, hope, triumph, and despair converge into a single, decisive thrust into uncertainty. With that hesitant yet irrevocable gesture, John crosses a line that marks both an end and a beginning, setting in motion consequences that will echo far beyond this ephemeral choice. In the stillness that follows, the path ahead, be it the possibility of a reclaimed life or the everlasting embrace of the dreadful realm, remains shrouded in ambiguity. Yet it is clear that this choice, laden with both loss and possibility, has altered him irreparably. The man who now stands at the precipice bears the weight of his decision, a silent testament to the dual truths of hope and despair. Beyond the threshold, John faces the portal back to his realm, fraught with temptations and haunting visions that threaten to pull him in once more. The threshold loomed before him like a living enigma, a rippling curtain of darkness laced with spectral luminescence that seemed to breathe and shift at its own inscrutable pace. Its surface undulated in gentle pulses, flickering between deep, cobalt blues and impenetrable blacks, as if it were a window into a realm of unfathomable mystery. Each ripple traced subtle patterns reminiscent of ancient symbols long forgotten, hinting at secrets that lay tangled in the fabric of time and shadow. As John drew nearer, a palpable chill swept over him, unlike any ordinary drop in temperature. This was a cold that seeped deep into the marrow of his bones, a slow, creeping sensation that urged him to pause and listen, to heed the silent message carried on the air. The atmosphere thickened around the portal, laden with an oppressive hum that vibrated in the spaces between his heartbeats, as though the very ground beneath him were echoing the ancient pulse of forces beyond comprehension. The portal's boundary, with its ghostly tendrils of luminescence interwoven with dark, predatory energy, appeared to pulse in tandem with the low, steady resonation that pervaded the space. Swirling mists of ethereal gray and hints of spectral blue danced around its edges, animated by unseen currents that pulled at the corners of John's consciousness. Each delicate wisp of smoke-like residue carried with it a whisper of memories and half-forgotten sorrows, inviting him to witness the lingering vestiges of worlds that had once been, and perhaps might be again. Every step he took toward this otherworldly gateway intensified the cocktail of sensations. A delicate, almost imperceptible vibration underfoot, as if the earth was murmuring secrets of eldritch realms, coupled with the intense, shuddering caress of the cold, pressed upon him relentlessly. The light emanating from the portal was not a comforting radiance, but a spectral glow that seemed to draw out latent fears buried deep within him. It shimmered intermittently, casting fleeting shadows that mimicked long-lost faces and fleeting moments of vulnerability. Amid this surreal interplay of light, sound, and touch, the portal exuded a hypnotic allure, a magnetic pull that hinted at both forbidden longing and an ominous promise of transformation. It evoked the sensation of standing at the crossroads of two disparate worlds, one governed by the rules of a tangible, natural order, and another free from morality, drenched in both terror and the uncharted possibility of rebirth. In that charged moment, the portal seemed to offer an unspoken invitation to relinquish the burdens of familiarity and step into the abyss of the unknown. Every sensory detail, from the prickling cold that shivered over his skin to the almost tangible charge in the air, coalesced into a moment of profound introspection. The gateway was not merely a physical passage. It was a living, breathing threshold that compelled John to confront the deepest recesses of his fear and the very essence of what it meant to venture into a realm where reality itself was poised to unravel. A dense, shuddering aura clings to the very edge of the portal, a tangle of inky threads and ephemeral glimmers that seems to breathe with a life of its own. These tendrils of shadow twist and coil in the stagnant air, each filament pulsating with memories that John can barely decipher. They are not just stray wisps of darkness. They are charged with echoes of forgotten sorrows and splintered moments of despair, as if the portal has absorbed the anguish of countless lost souls. In every shifting ripple along the threshold, there is a silent reminder of pain and memory, urging John to acknowledge that the boundary he stands before is as steeped in inner turmoil as it is in supernatural dread. The physical phenomenon is unmistakable. A chill crawls over John's skin, and the static energy in the air vibrates through his bones. Each flash of flickering light born within these residual energies is a visceral echo of his recent ordeals, a spectral dance of recollections that seem to tug at his resolve. The shadows ripple and merge, reflecting not only the physical scars of a realm steeped in darkness, but also the intangible wounds harbored deep within his own psyche. It is as though the portal has become a mirror to his soul, externalizing the uncertainty and despair that festered inside him long before this crossing was even conceived. In those subtle, shifting motions there is a dialogue unfolding, a quiet interplay between what is seen and what lies buried in John's memory. The spectral emissions act like physical manifestations of inner conflict. Each undulation of shadow seems to pulse in synchrony with the beat of his frightened heart. This interplay is instructive in its symbolism. The residual forces are not arbitrary, but rather a measured reflection of his internal landscape. They offer a visual narrative of the personal battles he has waged, the moments of vulnerability that have left their indelible imprint on his spirit. The energy strung along the portal's rim becomes a living chronicle of past turmoil and a stark forecast of the emotional maelstrom that might still lie ahead. Beyond mere echoes, these residual forces serve as agents of persuasive temptation, a magnetic pull that challenges John's grip on his current resolve. Fleeting images, half-formed in the mists of his memory, emerge with each ripple. There are brief, familiar silhouettes that suggest safety, moments of solace, and long-forgotten comfort, all interwoven with the sinister promise that, within the gloom, answers to his deepest wounds might be found. Yet, every spectral allure is tainted by the pervasive influence of the dreadful realm, a reminder that this energy is as much a part of the nightmarish dimension as it is a reflection of his internal strife. Observing this alarming convergence of light, shadow, and memory, it becomes clear that the portal's residual energies are more than mere remnants. They are a meticulously woven tapestry of his past, a physical condensation of haunting echoes that mirror his inner turmoil. Each ripple and every trembling tendril speaks to the transformative and treacherous power etched into this threshold, a power that demands not only recognition but also a cautious, measured response before one can dare to step forward. The portal shimmers with a hypnotic glow, its surface alive with seductive flashes that seem to offer the warmth of a long-forgotten past. In the wavering light, comforting yet unreal images emerge. A smiling face from happier times, the familiar backdrop of a cherished home, even the gentle laughter of voices that once soothed his deepest loneliness. These spectral visions tap into John's yearning for the safe haven of memory, each image carefully designed to lull him into a sense of nostalgic ease. Yet behind these phantasmal scenes, there lurks an insidious undertone, the promise of escape from his relentless pain, a temporary reprieve that comes at a price too steep to fathom. John's inner dialogue spins a chaotic symphony of doubt and desire. In one fleeting moment, his heart beats faster at the sight of a comforting visage, a figure from his past whose presence once signified unconditional love. That person's smile, though achingly familiar, is rendered in ghostly hues that betray its unreality. This can be real again. A part of him whispers, seduced by the possibility of mending what was broken. But another, more cautious voice within him balks at the too perfect illusion, warning, "Not everything that glimmers is salvation. These are siren calls meant to entrap you." This inner conflict intensifies as the visions shift and meld, now conjuring images of simpler, pain-free moments that dance tantalizingly close to the realm of possibility, a reality where despair is temporarily forgotten. Alongside these comforting specters emerge murmurs that echo softly in the recesses of his mind. Their cadence is both familiar and otherworldly, whispering promises of solace and the careless abandon of suffering. The murmurs seduce him with hints of reprieve, a lie dressed in soothing tones, offering to be the balm for his battered soul. Yet each hushed word carries an undercurrent of manipulation, a subtle reminder that surrendering to these promises could lead him down a path from which there is no return. As they swirl around him, these voices invade the sanctuary of his contemplation, urging him to trade his hard-won awareness for a fleeting moment of calm. He stands motionless, caught in a paralyzing moment of decision, the internal battle laid bare. Every step toward the ethereal lure is measured against the risk of losing himself within these crafted illusions. The more the visions coax him with their alluring tenderness, the more John's instinct for self-preservation roars its defiance. He forces himself to scrutinize each image, each whispered promise, a process that becomes a taught lesson in discernment. One must learn that not every memory worth longing for is genuine, and not every escape is an answer. The spectral figures, arranged with an almost surgical precision in the recesses of the portal, embody his suppressed hopes but also the insidious trap of false comfort. In this charged confrontation, the lesson unfolds. To recognize that the embrace of familiarity might just be a velvet cage disguised as sanctuary. The portal's seductive temptations, however vivid, are mirrors reflecting not only what he desires but also the delicate boundaries of his own resilience. And so, with every fiber of his being straining against the seductive call, John navigates this fraught battleground, one where the price of momentary solace may well be the surrender of his very self. Every measured step he took was an act of defiance against the gravitational pull of the unknown, a silent testament to his resolve amid swirling uncertainties. As John advanced toward the threshold, the ground beneath him seemed to murmur memories of a past both beautiful and bleak. Each cautious footfall stirred up echoes of laughter long vanished and shadows of grief that had once almost undone him, blending into a symphony of conflicting emotions. It was as if the very earth was urging him to pause, compelling him to reflect on the price of both retreat and progress. In that liminal space, the journey was not defined by distance but by the internal calculus of his heart and mind. The portal beckoned with a mesmerizing allure. Flashes of familiar faces, stolen moments of peace, and the promise of returning to what had once been real. Yet, interwoven with these visions was the gnawing awareness that such recollections were tinged with the same oppressive darkness that now encroached upon his senses. Every step carried him deeper into a terrain where memory and longing clashed, a place where the comforting contours of his former world were distorted by the imprints of dread and regret. John's mind became a quiet forum of dual deliberations. As the spectral light of the portal cast uncertain glimmers on his determined face, he weighed the seduction of an alluring past against the perils of losing his hard-won self. There, in the charged silence of that forlorn corridor, his thoughts waged a delicate war. One faction clung to the hope that the familiar might still offer refuge, while another warned that surrendering completely could mean being forever claimed by the abyss. The internal negotiation was both a lesson in restraint and an exercise in self-discovery, a process of identifying what parts of his battered identity he could reclaim and which he must finally let go. Progressing deliberately, John became acutely aware of every nuanced sensation. A chill that seemed to seep into his bones, the almost imperceptible hum of lingering energies, and the bittersweet taste of anticipation mingled with anxiety. This careful journey was akin to traversing a labyrinth mapped out in the archives of his own experiences. With each hesitant step, he was forced to confront the magnitude of his inner conflicts. The fragility of hope, the enduring weight of sorrow, and the simultaneous drive to break free from both. The physical distance to the portal was but a mirror for the emotional and psychological expanse he was crossing. The delicate balance between advancing and retreating was a silent teacher. John learned, in each measured movement, that the journey toward reclaiming his past did not demand a blind embrace of nostalgia. Instead, he was tasked with accepting that every stride carried with it both a risk and a promise. A reminder that the path forward was one of deliberate choice, demanding vigilance against the seductive allure of what might be an illusion. In that twilight of doubt and determination, every step became a statement, an affirmation that the real challenge lay not in crossing the portal, but in understanding the inner labyrinth that each footfall awakened. John's gaze remains fixed on the quivering aperture that stands as a dividing line between two very different worlds, a pulsating vortex of ethereal shadows and half-remembered dreams. The portal shimmers with a spectral light, its surface a restless dance of dark energies that undulate like the breath of long-forgotten phantoms. Each ripple along its surface whispers promises of a life unburdened by the relentless despair of his recent trials, yet also hints at the seductive unknown that beckons from beyond. In the charged silence that surrounds him, John senses both the call of a familiar reality and the malignant allure of the dreadful realm. The air grows thick with a spectral chill that gnaws at his resolve, each microsecond drawing him closer to a decision that will forever alter his destiny. Shadows seem to writhe along the threshold, each one a living echo of the comforts he once knew. A life marked by order and predictability, and of the profound release that the realm, with all its dangerous beauty, promises in return. He stands on the brink, with the numbing beat of his heart synchronizing with the pulsating rhythm of the portal. Images from a life of calming routine and hopeful mornings flicker in his mind. The gentle hum of everyday life, the promise of familiar faces and warm light. Yet, these tender recollections compete with dark, seductive visions that surge up from the depths of the portal. Ephemeral scenes of liberation from suffering, of a transformation so complete that it might wash away the remnants of his accumulated grief. Every sense is assaulted by this paradox, the alluring warmth of what was and the ghostly chill of what could be. In this moment of suspended time, every nerve in his body vibrates with the weight of internal conflict. The very air seems to carry a murmur, a soft but insistent choir of voices that tempt him to leave behind the certainty of his past. These murmurs merge with the ceaseless hum of the portal, crafting a hypnotic cadence that challenges his determination to remain anchored in the realm he once called home. The whispers suggest that sometimes, to hold on to even a fragment of peace, one must surrender to forces older and far more inscrutable than mere human resolve. Caught at the fulcrum, the final crossroads where every heartbeat is both a step toward reclaiming the life he once knew and a perilous dive into an allure from which there is no clear return. John's internal struggle becomes a battle of wills. Every step toward this enigmatic threshold is laden with the collective weight of his recent sufferings, of all the echoes that have led him to this inevitable point of no return. With a deep, shuddering breath that carries both resignation and fierce determination, he makes his choice. In that fraught instant, the dual promise of familiarity and fatal seduction merge into one defining moment, leaving the outcome shrouded in uncertainty and echoing the indelible impact of the realm on the fragile tapestry of his soul. Awakening in shadows. Emerging from the ordeal, John reflects on his journey, forever changed by his brush with darkness and what lies beyond. John stepped through the threshold and found himself in a world both achingly familiar and disconcertingly altered. The street he had walked 1,000 times lay under a sky that now bore an otherworldly, diffuse glow. No longer the crisp blue of his childhood memories, but a muted palette of ashen grays and deep blues that blurred the line between day and twilight. Every element of his surroundings, from the time-worn brick facades of storefronts to the gentle curve of the pavement, seemed draped in a shimmering, spectral light. It was as if reality, rigid in its rules before, had softened at the edges, letting echoes of that dreadful dimension seep into every detail. As John ambled along the sidewalk, familiar sounds, the hum of passing cars, distant snippets of conversation, even the soft rustle of leaves, resounded with an unexpected dissonance. Each everyday noise carried an undercurrent, a faint hint of an unfamiliar cadence that reminded him of the uncanny murmurs from the realm he had escaped. The comforting rhythm of metropolitan life now harbored subtle distortions, as if the vibrancy of ordinary existence was intermingling with the ephemeral whispers of a place where terror and despair had once reigned. Stepping deeper into his reawakened surroundings, John noticed minute anomalies that belied the world he thought he knew. A lamppost that once stood as a steadfast beacon in the night now threw elongated, wavering shadows that sketched odd figures onto the pavement. Even the once predictable flicker of neon signs seemed to pulse with a life of their own. This sensory dissonance, a blend of warm, remembered textures with interludes of something foreign and unsettling, challenged his notion of absolute familiarity. Every touch, every sight stirred memories of that chaotic dimension, bridging an invisible gap between what was once merely known and what now carried traces of the ineffable. In the measured cadence of his footsteps, the textures of the world called out to him. The cool, rough feel of the concrete mingled with an unaccountable diffused luminescence, as though the mundane had been painted anew by an unseen and spectral hand. The air itself felt charged. Each inhaled breath was infused with a blend of familiar city scents. A hint of rain on asphalt, the lingering aroma of coffee from a nearby cafe, and a delicate, almost imperceptible tang that recalled the oppressive atmosphere of the realm he had just traversed. This reemergence into normalcy, however, was more than a simple return. It was a transformative unveiling. The everyday had become a canvas for introspection. John's mind, still reverberating with the echoes of his recent ordeal, reinterpreted every minute detail. Although his body moved among his old haunts, His eyes now perceived an interplay of light and shadow that transcended ordinary observation. The comfort of recollection met the unnerving reminder that the boundaries of reality had shifted, leaving behind clues that the dreadful world was not entirely confined to memory. In that delicate intersection of familiarity and enigma, John understood that his return was not a restoration, but a reinvention, a subtle, yet indelible, recalibration of every sense and memory he once took for granted. Every quiet moment that follows feels charged with the weight of memory, a collage of scenes that refuses to be neatly archived. I find myself adrift in a tide of recollection where every flash of grim imagery and every echo of a distant, almost forgotten whisper shapes my present. It isn't simply a revisiting of a past that once tore at the fabric of my being, but an immersive dialogue with the lessons etched into my soul. In that silent dialogue, each recollection insists on its own importance. The distorted silhouettes of shifting light, the eerie cadence of sounds that skirted the edges of my perception, and the subtle interplay between terror and fragile hope that illuminated even the darkest shadow. I recall, with a clarity that is both unnerving and enlightening, moments when reality itself seemed to falter. In these fragmented instants, the boundaries of my inner world expanded to encompass more than my once limited understanding of self and existence. Every fleeting vision, a shuddering glimpse of an indistinct figure, the soft yet insistent murmur of voices that seemed to carry unspoken questions, became an unintentional lesson. They demanded that I reassess not only the chronology of my experience but also the deeper implications of each step that led me further away from the life I once knew. As I sift through these memories, I sense that they are not arbitrary echoes of fear but purposeful signposts, guiding me to a truth long obscured by routine. These vivid flashbacks, interwoven with gentle yet persistent residual whispers, force an honest reckoning with parts of myself I had buried beneath the comfort of familiarity. It is as if each memory, each second of visceral encounter, carries an implicit lesson on the value of introspection. The fragmented images and sensory recollections reveal that the boundary between what I felt then and what I now experience is far thinner than I had ever imagined. They urge me to reconfigure my understanding of strength, to see vulnerability not simply as a weakness, but as a crucible for forging resilience. In the steady cadence of these reflections lies a subtle, transformative power. Every recollected tremor or disconcerting vision calls for an examination of my inner landscape, a reminder that my journey, steeped in overwhelming dread, was also a pathway to self-discovery. It teaches me that our most harrowing encounters are, in truth, the best instructors, offering insights that reverberate long after the immediate terror has subsided. These memories, intertwined with the persistent echo of that other realm, invite me to reconcile the fragments of my identity into a more coherent whole, one that appreciates the delicate equilibrium between fear and wisdom. Thus, as I allow these recollections to resurface and mingle with the present, I learn that every moment of darkness carries a seed of understanding. It is in this reflective immersion that I come to see my past not as an oppressive weight but as the very foundation upon which my future will be built, a living testament to the enduring interplay between what was, what is, and what might yet be. A sudden chill skitters along John's skin, a subtle but unequivocal reminder that the darkness he escaped has not entirely abandoned him. In the quiet moments after his return, when the familiar murmur of daily life fills the air, he finds himself pausing to feel that inexplicable shiver, as if an unseen hand had brushed past him. It is in these gentle, unexpected moments that he first senses the ethereal residue of the dreadful realm. There is an unnerving quality in the fleeting visions that weave through his peripheral sight, the twisted form of a grotesque figure, barely discernible in the low light, vanishing the moment he dares to focus. These apparitions do not manifest with the grandeur of the nightmare he endured, yet their subtle presence is a persistent echo of that other existence. In the stillness of a quiet afternoon, as he sits alone with his thoughts, John begins to notice the muted cadence of disembodied voices that seem to ripple through the air. Their whispers are neither threatening nor consoling, merely a persistent reminder that the dreadful realm's influence clings to him like a second skin. These voices, incoherent at times yet laden with an undercurrent of mournful significance, serve as a spectral lesson. They insist that the boundary between what was experienced and what remains becomes ever more porous with each passing day. Even as he endeavors to engage with the world around him, the murmurs persist, mingling with his memories and softly instructing him on the inevitable unity of fear and identity. As he navigates the familiar streets now tinged with an inexplicable gloom, John comes to realize that these lingering echoes are not isolated phenomena, but rather symbols of an inextricable link between his past and his present. A chill on his neck, half forgotten yet deeply felt, becomes a tactile reminder of the abyss he once traversed. In that subtle sensation lies a tacit instruction. Each tremor of cold, every half-glimpsed shadow, is a fragment of the dreadful world that still inhabits him. The spectral visitation, brief, elusive, and profoundly emblematic, teaches him that no experience of profound darkness is entirely unburdened by its mark. It exists imperceptibly at times, in the very fabric of his being, forever altering how he perceives the interplay of light and shadow in his daily life. These quiet encounters collectively mold his understanding of the cost of confronting such cosmic dread. They serve not as harbingers of imminent danger, but as solemn tutors in the art of introspection. A persistent whisper urging him to acknowledge that the transformative influence of that realm is permanently woven into his identity. In the interplay of unexpected chills, fleeting phantom silhouettes, and the low, continuous murmur of lost voices, there is a constant, almost didactic lesson. John gradually accepts that these lingering shadows are not invaders from an external terror, but rather indelible parts of his inner landscape. They compel him to engage with the unchangeable truth that even as he reclaims the semblance of normalcy, the darkness persists, quietly shaping every thought, every blink of recognition, and every cautious step into the future. John emerged into his world seemingly intact, yet every step he took resonated with the echoes of a past transformed. In the silent aftermath of his ordeal, he found that the confrontation with an unutterable darkness had stripped away the layers of his old identity and replaced them with something raw, unrefined, and unmistakably real. The man he once was, a creature of routine and self-assured certainties, had been irrevocably altered. Now, every thought and every sensation was imbued with the intense clarity that only the brush with such profound terror can bestow. In the quiet moments that followed his return, John's inner landscape laid itself bare for introspection. He recognized that the ordeal had not just taken him to the brink of dread, but had also expanded the boundaries of his perception. Each memory of twisted corridors and disjointed voices was now a lesson etched into his psyche, a reminder that life is a constantly shifting tapestry, where even the darkest threads can yield a surprising depth of meaning. It was as though the experience had unlocked a hidden reservoir of reflection, letting him see that truth is often concealed behind the veil of everyday banality, waiting to be discovered in the unlikeliest of circumstances. His internal evolution was marked by a profound recalibration of what he held true. Where he once accepted the fabric of reality as unequivocal and unchanging, he now acknowledged its fluidity, its susceptibility to the interplay of shadow and light. The iridescent burden of that dark encounter had imbued him with a new wisdom, one that was as enlightening as it was laden with sorrow. Each recollection of the horrors he faced revealed the dual nature of enlightenment, the liberation that comes from understanding our inner depths, intertwined with an enduring grief for the innocence that was irretrievably lost. In embracing this transformation, John learned that true self-discovery often demands an uneasy reconciliation of contradictions. The insights born from his dance with darkness suggested that wisdom rarely comes without cost. The clarity of his new vision was tempered by the weight of the memories that clung to him like shadows at dusk. It was a lesson in balance, wherein the brilliance of a freshly illuminated mind was inseparable from the scars of past farewells. The experience taught him to hold both hope and despair in delicate measure, understanding that each informs the other in shaping a complete human experience. As his inner world reformed, he began to appreciate that transformation is not a singular moment of triumph but an ongoing process of integration. The wisdom gleaned from his encounter became a constant companion, a guide that urged him to consider every aspect of his life with infinite nuance. In the interplay between the stark clarity of revelation and the murky recollections of what he had endured, John forged a new identity, one that recognized the beauty in the interplay of light and darkness, and the inevitable loss that accompanies the acquisition of true, unfettered insight. In this state of altered perception, John embraced his changed self with cautious resolve. The transformative brush with darkness had left him wiser yet burdened, a living testament to the paradox that growth comes with both enlightening understanding and the enduring weight of irretrievable loss. John emerges into the light of his former world, a realm that now feels startlingly familiar yet unmistakably altered. In the soft glow of early morning, every familiar detail seems tinged with a ghostly resonance, as if the echoes of that dreadful other dimension still whisper in the quiet spaces between moments. He treads carefully along streets he once knew, his every step a measured dance between the comfort of routine and the unsettling pull of memories that refuse to fade. As he walks, John's mind reflects deeply on the journey that brought him here. There is a persistent cadence in his thoughts, a questioning of whether the normalcy he once took for granted was ever truly secure. In this contemplative silence, he ponders the delicate balance between hope and forewarning, recognizing that reclaiming the ordinary may require accepting the lingering presence of the extraordinary. Every sound, every subtle shift in the breeze carries with it the weight of that profound encounter with darkness. Within him grows a cautious optimism, a belief that the future may yet hold warmth, stability, and possibility, despite the haunting echoes of chaotic realms past. Yet, even as he embraces the light and the promise of renewal, an inner voice reminds him of the fragile nature of all things. That same voice questions if his renewed world might someday be penetrated once more by the enigmatic forces that once shattered his sense of reality. This duality, the interplay of hope and lingering dread, becomes a powerful lesson etched into his very being. He examines every new sensation with thoughtful scrutiny. The soft murmur of everyday life, the rustling of leaves, distant laughter, and the rhythmic pulse of city sounds, causes him to wonder whether these familiar signs are reliable anchors or simply illusions crafted to mask a deeper, unsettling truth. John finds himself teaching his own inner self that life is an intricate tapestry of light interwoven with shadow. To truly appreciate the vibrancy of hope, one must not ignore the dim, persistent afterimages of a darker past. In his quiet introspection, John begins to recognize the profound impact of his ordeal. The transformative insights he has gained are neither entirely uplifting nor wholly burdensome. They are a somber, ambivalent inheritance. The clarity of day and the murkiness of night seem forever entwined now, suggesting that every moment of happiness may carry with it the quiet echo of something lost, or perhaps something waiting to be rediscovered. This understanding, both unsettling and necessary, becomes a compass for his uncertain steps forward. At this pivotal juncture, as he contemplates the hazards and gifts bestowed by his experience, a single, pressing question emerges. Can the borders between the realm of normalcy and that other, dread-infused dimension ever be fully severed? Standing on the threshold of an uncharted future, John acknowledges that while he returns to a world of familiar shapes, the dark residue of his past lingers. In its subtle, unyielding presence, it quietly shapes his thoughts and actions, leaving him to wonder if the boundary he once trusted was ever truly impervious, or if it merely awaits the next unwary soul to test its fragile limits.